In a world of wolves, her only secret was supposed to be that she was human. But the truth is far more terrifying. She's not just an outsider, she's the daughter of their greatest enemy, and her past is a monster that's coming to collect. Chapter 1: The Scent of Rain and Roses. The first thing Vivienne loved about Roman was his scent. It was a complex, intoxicating blend of pine needles after a storm, rich, dark earth, and something else, something uniquely him, a warm, musky spice that spoke of power and safety. It was the scent of home, a home she'd never known she was searching for until she'd stumbled into the territory of the Blackwood Pack, and quite literally into the arms of its alpha. Tonight, that scent was all around her. They were tucked away in the deep leather armchair in his study, a massive room paneled with dark oak and lined with books she had painstakingly organized. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across Roman's powerfully built frame. His arm was a solid weight around her, his chin resting on the top of her head as she leaned against his chest, the steady, strong beat of his heart a soothing drum against her ear. "You're quiet tonight, my love." Roman's voice rumbled, the vibration traveling through her. He shifted, his large hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking the soft skin there. His touch was always gentle, a stark contrast to the raw strength she knew he possessed. Vivienne sighed, a sound of pure contentment, and tilted her head back to look at him. His face, all sharp angles and rugged masculinity, softened when he looked at her. His eyes, the color of molten gold, held a depth of affection that still made her breath catch. "Just thinking," she murmured, lifting a hand to trace the line of his jaw. The faint stubble rasped pleasantly against her fingertips. A low growl, this one of pleasure, vibrated in his chest. "The fates had a plan for us, Vivienne. My wolf knew it the moment he saw you." She smiled. "Your wolf wanted to chase the terrified human who trespassed on your land." He chuckled, a deep, rich sound that filled the room. "He knew you were ours to protect, not to hunt, even if the man was a little slow on the uptake." He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was both tender and possessive. It started soft, a gentle claiming, before deepening, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips, asking for entrance she readily gave. The kiss tasted of him, of strength and belonging, and it sent a familiar warmth coiling deep in her belly. When they broke apart, she was breathless. "I love you, Roman." "You are the moon to my wolf, the heart to my man," he whispered against her lips, his own words a sacred vow she'd heard him repeat many times. "I love you more than the territory I rule." It was perfect. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, but even in this perfect moment, a tiny cold sliver of fear lodged itself beneath her ribs. It was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to the edges of her happiness. It was the fear of her past, a past that she had meticulously buried when she had taken the name Vivienne and started a new life. A life that had led her here, to him. A sharp knock on the study door broke the spell. Roman's head lifted, his golden eyes hardening slightly, the alpha returning. "Enter." The door opened to reveal Axel, Roman's beta and closest friend. He was leaner than Roman, his energy more coiled, but he possessed the same underlying power. His gaze was respectful as he looked at his alpha, but when his eyes flickered to Vivienne, a subtle coolness entered them. He, like many in the pack, tolerated her for Roman's sake, but had never truly accepted a human as the alpha's mate. "Alpha," Axel said, his voice clipped. There has been a situation at the southern border. A rogue was spotted, the patrol engaged. Roman was instantly on his feet, his body thrumming with authority. Vivienne felt the loss of his warmth immediately. Casualties? None on our side. The rogue was insistent, kept talking nonsense before he was subdued. Something about a debt being owed. Vivienne's heart gave a painful thud. Debt. The word was a key turning in a lock she had prayed would remain rusted shut. She kept her expression carefully neutral, her hands clasped in her lap to stop them from shaking. Roman's gaze swept the room, and for a fleeting second his eyes met hers. He saw the flicker of something in them, a shadow he couldn't name. His brow furrowed. "I'll be there directly. Double the patrols for the night. I want a full report on my desk by sunrise." "Yes, Alpha," Axel said. He cast one last lingering look at Vivienne before turning and leaving, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence in the room was suddenly heavy. The warmth of their embrace had vanished, replaced by the chill of an Alpha's duty. Roman turned back to her, his expression unreadable. He walked over and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. They were ice cold. "Are you all right, Vivienne?" he asked, his voice softer again, the concern in his golden eyes genuine. "You look pale." She forced a smile, a fragile thing she was sure he could see right through. "Of course, just startled. The talk of rogues is always frightening." He searched her face, his wolf's intuition undoubtedly warring with his man's love for her. He could sense things others couldn't, shifts in scent, the frantic rhythm of a heart. She focused on breathing slowly, on calming the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "You have nothing to fear, Vivienne," he said, his voice a low, fierce promise. "No one and nothing will ever harm you while I draw breath. You are the Luna of this pack, my mate. You are safe here." He sealed the promise with a kiss to his forehead, a brand of ownership and protection. But as he stood and walked towards the door, shrugging on the heavy coat that signaled his departure into the night, Vivienne's stomach twisted. He believed her to be Vivienne, the quiet librarian with a tragic, unremarkable past. He believed she was safe within his territory. He was wrong, on both counts, and the rogue's talk of a debt was the first tremor of the earthquake that was coming to shatter their world. Chapter 2. The Echo of a Nightmare. The pack house was a sprawling, formidable structure of timber and stone, built to withstand both the harsh northern winters and the threat of attack. But to Vivienne, its true nature was revealed not in its grand vaulted common room or its heavily fortified walls, but in the quiet moments. It was in the scent of baking bread that wafted from the communal kitchen in the morning, the sound of children's laughter from the training grounds in the afternoon, and the low, contented murmurs of pack members gathering by the fire in the evening. It was a living, breathing entity, a sanctuary of community and belonging. A week had passed since the incident with the rogue. Roman had been consumed with pack business, his presence a whirlwind of authority and decisive action. The rogue had been interrogated, and finding him to be a lone, crazed wanderer with no real connections, Roman had exiled him with a final, brutal warning. The pack had settled back into its rhythm, and the tension that had briefly gripped the territory dissipated like morning fog. For Vivienne, however, the fog had not lifted. It had crept into her heart, a chilling mist of anxiety that clung to her every waking moment and haunted her dreams. Tonight it was worse. She had woken with a gasp, the remnants of a nightmare clinging to her like a shroud. In the dream she was running, her bare feet pounding against cold, unforgiving cobblestones. The air was thick with the smell of blood and ozone, and the sound of a man's laughter, cruel and sharp, echoed all around her. She was not Vivienne in the dream. She was someone else, someone she had fought for years to forget. She slipped out of the massive bed she shared with Roman, careful not to wake him. He was a light sleeper, his wolf always alert, but he was exhausted from the long week. In the pale moonlight streaming through the large window, she could see the peaceful expression on his face, his features relaxed in sleep. The sight of him, so powerful, yet so vulnerable, sent a fresh wave of love and guilt washing over her. Padding silently across the cold wooden floor, she wrapped a silk robe around herself and stepped out onto the private balcony adjoining their chambers. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The vast forest that made up the Blackwood territory stretched out before her, a sea of shadows under a blanket of stars. From this high vantage point, she could see the glow of the patrol fires, small beacons of safety in the immense darkness. "This is your home now," she told herself, gripping the cold stone of the balustrade. "That life is over. He can't find you here." But the fear was a living thing, a coiled serpent in her gut. The rogue's words, a debt being owed, had reawakened it. Debts, in the world she came from, were always paid, usually in blood. "Couldn't sleep?" Roman's voice, low and thick with sleep, startled her. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, a dark, imposing silhouette against the warm light from the bedroom. He wore only a pair of dark pants, his magnificent, scarred chest bare in the moonlight. He didn't speak, just pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in his warmth. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling his scent, letting it chase away the phantom smells of blood and fear from her dream. "Another nightmare?" he asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. She nodded against him, unable to speak. She told him she had them sometimes, attributing them to a fabricated traumatic childhood event, a house fire that had claimed her parents. It was a simple, tragic lie, one that explained her lack of family and her skittishness around sudden loud noises. It was a flimsy shield, but it was all she had. "The same one?" he pressed gently. "Running," she whispered. "I'm always running." His arms tightened around her. "You don't have to run any more, Vivienne. I swear it on my life." He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his golden eyes glowing with fierce intensity in the darkness. "Tell me what you see in them. Tell me who you're running from. Let me carry this burden with you." Her heart fractured a little. The sincerity in his voice, the desperate need to protect her, was a blade twisting in her gut. He was offering her the one thing she could never accept, the comfort of the full truth. If she told him, his love would turn to ash. His protection would become a cage, or worse, a pyre. "It's just shadows, Roman," she lied, hating the taste of the words in her mouth. "Fears from a past I'd rather forget. They have no power here." She forced a smile and reached up to touch his face. "You are my present, my future. That's all that matters." He searched her eyes, his wolf's gaze penetrating, and for a terrifying moment he thought he saw through the lie, through the carefully constructed walls to the terrified girl cowering inside. But then he sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders, and he leaned in to kiss her. It was a kiss of reassurance, of comfort. "All right," he murmured against her mouth. "But know this. If any shadow from your past ever dares to find its way here, it will have to contend with me, and I do not fear the dark." He led her back inside, back to the warmth and safety of their bed. She curled against him, his body a solid shield at her back, and tried to will herself back to sleep. But even as his steady breathing filled the silence, her mind was racing. His words, meant to comfort, had only sharpened her fear. Because the shadow from her past was not just a simple threat. It was a monster. A monster she had escaped once, but whose legacy was tattooed onto her very soul. And if he ever found her, he wouldn't just have to contend with Roman. He would come to collect his daughter. Chapter 3. A Vow in the Moonlight. The annual rite of the full moon was one of the most sacred traditions of the Blackwood Pack. It was a night of celebration, of honoring the bond between the wolves, their territory, and the lunar cycle that governed their power. A massive bonfire would be lit in the central clearing, and the pack would feast, dance, and share stories until the moon reached its zenith. Then the wolves would run, a river of gray, black, and brown fur flowing through the forest in a display of untamed, joyous freedom. For Vivienne, it was a night of mixed emotions. She loved seeing the pack in its element, the raw, beautiful wildness of their nature on full display. She loved the way Roman's eyes would glow with an inner light, the energy of the moon thrumming just beneath his skin. But it was also a stark reminder of what she was not. She was human. She could not run with them.
She could only watch from the sidelines, an observer to the most profound expression of their identity. This year, the feeling was more pronounced. The whispers had grown since the rogue's appearance. She felt the eyes on her back as she helped prepare the feast, the way conversations would hush when she approached. Katya, a lithe, sharp-featured she-wolf who had once hoped to be Roman's chosen mate, was the most overt. Her sneers were barely veiled, her comments dripping with disdain for the fragile human who had somehow ensnared their alpha. Vivienne did her best to ignore it, focusing on Roman. He stood near the roaring bonfire, a commanding presence that drew every eye. He was speaking with the pack elders, his expression serious, but every few moments his gaze would find hers across the clearing, a silent message of reassurance and love passing between them. Later, as the festivities reached their peak, he sought her out. He pulled her away from the throng, leading her by the hand to a small, secluded rocky outcrop that overlooked the clearing. From here, they could see everything, the dancing flames, the celebrating pack, but they were cocooned in a pocket of privacy. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice a low murmur that didn't carry on the wind. "I haven't," she protested softly, though she knew it was a lie. She had been distant, lost in her own fears. He turned her to face him, his large hands resting on her hips. The full moon cast a silvery glow over them, making his golden eyes seem almost ethereal. "I can feel it, Vivienne. A distance, a wall you're putting up. Did Katya say something to you again?" His voice hardened at the mention of her name. "Katya is always saying something," Vivienne deflected, tracing a pattern on his chest. "It's nothing I can't handle." "It's more than that." He was not to be deterred. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. The irony of his words was so bitter it almost made her choke. No secrets. Her entire life with him was built on one. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and unwelcome. I feel like an outsider tonight, Roman. I see the bond you all share, this incredible primal thing, and I'm not a part of it. I can't run with you. I can never truly understand what it is to be you." Relief washed over his features, followed by a wave of tenderness. This he could understand. This he could fix. He had misunderstood the source of her pain, and she let him because the truth was so much worse. "Oh, my love," he whispered, pulling her flesh against him. He looked down into her eyes, his own burning with the conviction that stole her breath. They may not all see it yet. They are bound by tradition, by fear of the unknown, but they will. I will make them see. He raised his voice, not shouting, but projecting it with the innate authority of the alpha. It cut through the din of the celebration below, and heads began to turn in their direction. "Blackwood Pack," he called out, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. All eyes were on them now, hundreds of pairs of lupine eyes glowing in the firelight. Katya's face was a mask of cold fury. Axel looked on with a troubled expression.
Roman never took his eyes off Vivienne. He said, "For a year, this woman has stood by my side. She has shown more courage than many born with the wolf inside them. She has a heart of a Luna, even without the fur to match." He looked out at his pack. "You see a human. I see my mate, my other half. Her heart is the heart of this pack now, whether you accept it or not. An injury to her is an injury to me. A threat to her is a threat to our future. She is your Luna. You will show her the respect she is due." His declaration hung in the air, an undeniable command. A few of the elders nodded slowly in assent. Others looked uncertain, but no one dared to argue. The alpha had spoken. He then turned his full attention back to Vivienne, his eyes softening. He murmured for her ears only, "You are not an outsider. You are the center of my world. When I run tonight, I run for you. Every beat of my heart, every breath I take is yours." He sealed his vow with a kiss, deep and searing, a public claiming in front of the entire pack. It was a kiss that left no room for doubt, a brand of his love and ownership on her soul. In that moment, surrounded by the wild magic of the night and the unwavering devotion of this incredible man, the fear receded. For a few precious seconds, she allowed herself to believe it could be true, that his love could conquer anything, even the sins of her blood. But as the pack began to shift, their human forms melting away into the sleek, powerful bodies of wolves, a cold dread returned. The transformation was a beautiful, violent miracle of snapping bones and stretching skin. Roman's was the most breathtaking of all. He grew, his form expanding into that of a massive black wolf, his fur the color of midnight, his golden eyes burning with the spirit of the alpha. He approached her, no longer a man but a magnificent beast, and nudged her gently with his massive head. It was a gesture of profound affection. She buried her face in his thick fur, the wild, earthy scent of him filling her senses. "I love you," she thought, the words a silent prayer. He pulled back, let out a single deafening howl that was answered by the entire pack, and then he was gone. A black shadow leading a tide of wolves into the dark embrace of the forest. Vivienne stood alone on the outcrop, watching them go, the sound of their howls fading into the distance. Roman's vow echoed in her heart, a beautiful, fragile shield. But she knew a truth he did not. Respect and love could not stop a hunter, and the man she ran from in her dreams didn't care about vows made in the moonlight. He only cared about reclaiming what was his. Chapter 4. The Stranger at the Gates. The tranquility that followed the rite of the full moon was a fragile piece, a thin pane of glass Vivienne was terrified of shattering. Roman's public declaration had worked, to a degree. The pack's outward treatment of her shifted from veiled suspicion to grudging respect. Katya still watched her with venom in her eyes, but her insults were now confined to muttered aside rather than open challenges. She was, for all intents and purposes, the Luna.
She threw herself into the role, helping to organize supplies, tending to the sick in the infirmary, and spending hours in the library, archiving the pack's long and storied history. She was trying to build a life, to weave herself so thoroughly into the fabric of the Blackwood Pack that the threads of her past could never be unraveled. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the rite, when the first thread came loose. She was in the library, a sun-drenched room on the second floor of the pack house, carefully restoring the binding of an ancient tome. The scent of old paper and leather was a comfort to her. The silence was broken only by the scratching of her tools and the distant sounds of training drills from the yard below. Axel appeared at the door, his presence immediately disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. He didn't enter, just leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was, as usual, impossible to read. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his tone flat. Vivienne looked up, her heart giving a nervous flutter. No one ever came to see her. Visitors to the territory were rare, and they were always there on pack business, to see the alpha. "To see me? Are you sure?" He was very specific, asked for the librarian, said his name was Javier. The name hit her with the force of a physical blow. Javier, a ghost from a lifetime ago, a name she had not heard in over 5 years. The restoration tool slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. She bent to retrieve it, using the moment to hide the shock and terror that must have been written all over her face. Her mind was a maelstrom of questions. How did he find her? Why was he here? Did he send him? I don't know anyone by that name, she said, her voice strained as she straightened up. Axel's gaze was sharp, missing nothing. "He seems to know you, or at least knows of you. He's a human, old, looks like he's seen a rough life." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Roman is away, inspecting the northern border. He won't be back until tomorrow." Of course, the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Javier, or whoever had sent him, knew the Alpha was gone. "Where is he?" I asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He's at the main gate. He's not being permitted entry, obviously, but he refuses to leave. Says he has a message for you, something important." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. A message. She knew what kind of messages Javier used to deliver. They were never good news. I'll go and see what he wants," she said, trying to project a calm she was far from feeling. She had to see him. She had to know why he was here, and more importantly, she had to get him to leave before Roman returned. "I don't think that's a good idea," Axel said, his tone shifting from neutral to protective. It wasn't for her, she knew, but for his Alpha, his pack. A strange human appearing at their heavily guarded border asking for the Alpha's mate was a red flag of the highest order. "No," the word was sharper than she intended. She softened her tone, forcing a placating smile.
"No, please. It's all right. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Perhaps it's a relative of someone I once knew. I won't go alone. You can come with me." Axel considered this for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. She felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, her every secret exposed under his scrutiny. She prayed her scent wasn't betraying her terror, but she knew werewolves could smell fear as clearly as they could smell rain. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, but you will stay behind me, and you will not cross the gate line. Understood?" "Understood," she agreed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The walk to the main gate felt like a march to her own execution. The gate was a massive, iron-bound wooden structure set into a high stone wall that encircled the core of the pack's territory. 2 guards, their forms broad and imposing, stood watch. They nodded respectfully to Axel, but their eyes were fixed on the lone figure standing on the dirt road outside. He looked just as Axel had described. Older, maybe in his late 50s, with a weathered face, a wiry frame, and gray-streaked dark hair. He was dressed in worn, practical clothing, but it was his eyes that she remembered. They were dark and watchful, the eyes of a man who had seen too much and survived things he shouldn't have. He saw her approaching behind Axel, and a slow, grim smile touched his lips. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile of recognition, of a shared, dark history. "Axel, stay here with the guards," Vivienne said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll speak to him from the gate." Axel looked like he wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. He stood back, his posture alert, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of trouble. Vivienne walked to the bars of the gate, her hands gripping the cold iron. She was close enough to see the deep lines etched around Javier's eyes, close enough to smell the scent of dust and cheap tobacco clinging to him. "Hello, Callista," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He used her old name, the name she had shed like a snakeskin. Hearing it spoken aloud here, in the heart of her sanctuary, felt like a violation. "That's not my name anymore," she said coldly. "What are you doing here, Javier?" "He's looking for you," Javier said simply, his dark eyes holding hers. "He's been looking for a long time. Word got out that a human girl had found a safe haven with the Blackwood Alpha, a girl who matched your description." The world tilted on its axis. "No," she breathed. "He can't know. How could he know?" "He has eyes everywhere. Always has," Javier replied. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He sent me with this, a reminder. He slid the paper through the bars of the gate. It fell to the ground at her feet. For a moment, she just stared at it, her body frozen in terror. It looked so innocuous, a simple scrap of paper, but she knew it was a death sentence. "What does he want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He wants what belongs to him," Javier said, his gaze unwavering. "He wants his property back, his little bird. He says your cage is waiting." He took a step back from the gate. "Read the note. You know the protocol. He'll be in touch."
And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the dirt road without a backward glance. Vivienne stood there, her knuckles white on the iron bars, her world crumbling around her. Behind her, she could hear Axel approaching, his heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel. What was that about? He demanded. What did he want? She couldn't answer. She slowly bent down, her hand shaking, and picked up the folded piece of paper. She didn't need to open it to know what was inside. It would be a single, chilling sentence, a promise and a threat. The debt is due. Chapter 5. The First Crack in the Trust. Returning to the pack house was a surreal experience. The sun was still shining, pack members were still going about their daily routines, and the world seemed, on the surface, entirely unchanged. But for Vivienne, the colors had muted, the sounds had deadened. A pall of dread had fallen over everything, smothering the life she had so carefully built. She secluded herself in the library, the folded note from Javier tucked deep into the pocket of her dress. It felt like a shard of ice pressed against her skin, a constant, chilling reminder. She tried to read, to lose herself in the stories of others, but the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Her own story, the one she thought she had finished writing, had just had a terrifying new chapter forced upon it. She replayed the conversation with Axel. She had been vague, dismissive. She had told him the man was a grifter from a town she had passed through years ago, someone who had heard she was now the Alpha's mate and had come looking for a handout. She claimed the note was just a list of his supposed troubles, a pathetic attempt at a sob story. It was a weak lie, and she knew it. Axel hadn't looked convinced, but he also had no evidence to the contrary. He had simply nodded, his expression grim, and told him he would include the incident in his report for the Alpha. The thought of Roman reading that report, of him questioning me, made my stomach clench with nausea. Their relationship was built on a foundation of fierce, unwavering trust. Today, she had taken a hammer to that foundation, creating the first crack. She was so lost in her spiraling thoughts that she didn't hear him enter. One moment she was alone, the next, Roman's scent filled the room, potent and familiar. She looked up with a start to see him standing there, dust on his boots and weariness in his eyes, but his gaze was fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He was back a day early. "Roman," she breathed, standing up from her chair. "You're back." He didn't smile. He walked towards her, his movements measured, predatory. He stopped a few feet away, his golden eyes scanning her face, searching for something. "Axel met me on the road," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He told me you had a visitor." Vivienne's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to school her features into an expression of calm annoyance. It was nothing, a delusional man looking for money. Axel overreacted. Did he? Roman took another step closer, invading her personal space. He could downily smell the fear, coming off her in waves, a scent that would be a profound betrayal to him. Mates were not supposed to fear each other.
Axel said the man knew your name, or a name at least. She had to stick to her story. To deviate now would be to admit the lie. He was a con artist, Roman. He probably asked around in the nearest human town, found out about me. It's what they do. And the note he gave you? Roman held out his hand. Let me see it. The moment of truth. The note in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. If he saw it, if he read those words, questions would be asked that she could not answer without revealing everything. I threw it away, she said, the lie tasting like acid. It was just a pathetic plea for money, filled with nonsense. It wasn't worth keeping. The silence that followed was deafening. Roman's eyes, Those beautiful golden eyes that had always looked at her with such adoration were now hard, opaque. The alpha was looking at her, not the lover. He was assessing a threat, a weakness in his defenses. "You're lying to me, Vivienne," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. The words were low, laced with a hurt that was far worse than anger. "I'm not," she insisted, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "Why would I lie to you? That's what I'm trying to understand." His control he was holding snapped, and his voice rose to a low roar that vibrated through the floorboards. The books on the shelves seemed to tremble. "A stranger, a human, appears at my gate, knows your name, gives you a secret message, and you tell me it's nothing? You, who fears the shadows in her own dreams, confronted this man, and you expect me to believe you weren't affected?" He was right. Her reaction, her feigned nonchalance, didn't line up with the timid persona she had so carefully crafted. It was a mistake, a fatal flaw in her performance. "I was frightened," she admitted, shifting tactics. "Of course I was frightened. But I was also embarrassed. I didn't want you to think I was bringing trouble to your doorstep. I dealt with it so you wouldn't have to." "Dealt with it?" He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "By hiding it from me? I am your mate, your alpha. Your troubles are my troubles. Your fears are mine to destroy. Do you think so little of me? Of what we have?" Tears welled in her eyes, genuine this time. They were tears of guilt, of fear, and a deep aching love for the man she was betraying. "No, Roman, I think the world of you. That's why I didn't want to bother you with something so trivial." He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle, but his eyes were still hard with suspicion and hurt. "Nothing about you is trivial, Vivienne. Nothing." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "My wolf is telling me you're hiding something. It can smell the deceit on you, and it does not like it." He was giving her one last chance to tell the truth. Her mind screamed at her to confess, to throw herself on his mercy and pray that his love was strong enough to withstand the cataclysm of her past. But her fear was stronger. The image of her father's cruel smile, the memory of his cold, calculating eyes flashed in her mind. He would not just punish her for her escape. He would destroy everything she now held dear. He would burn it to the ground just to watch her suffer. She couldn't do it. She couldn't risk them. She met his gaze, pouring every ounce of feigned sincerity she possessed into her own. "I promise you, Roman, it was nothing. The man is gone. It's over." He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. She could see the war raging within him, the alpha's instinct versus the mate's heart. She held her breath, waiting for the verdict. Finally, with a sigh that sounded like it was torn from his very soul, he let her go and stepped back. The hurt was still in his eyes, but a layer of weary resignation had settled over it. He had chosen to believe the woman he loved over the wolf he was. "Fine," he said, the word clipped and cold. "It's over." He turned and walked out of the library without another word, leaving her alone with the suffocating weight of her lies. The crack in their trust had just become a chasm, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it was only a matter of time before one of them fell in. Chapter 6. The Scent of Deceit. In the days that followed, an unnatural quiet settled between them. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a heavy, charged one, filled with unspoken words and unanswered questions. Roman was physically present, but emotionally, he was 1,000 miles away. He performed his duties as alpha, his movements efficient and his commands precise, but the warmth that had always defined him in her eyes had been banked, leaving only cool, watchful embers. He no longer pulled her into his arms in the middle of the night. Their conversations were stilted, confined to trivialities about the pack and the weather. He looked at her, but it felt as if he was looking through her, his gaze distant, The mate bond, that powerful, invisible tether that connected their souls, was still there, but it was strained, pulled taut with the weight of her deceit. It felt like a constant, dull ache in her chest. Vivienne's guilt was a relentless torment. She saw the pain she was causing him, the confusion and suspicion that warred with his love. Every moment of this cold distance was a fresh stab of the knife she herself had wielded. The pact, ever sensitive to the mood of their alpha, felt the shift too. The grudging respect she had earned after the rite of the full moon began to erode, replaced by a renewed sense of suspicion. They could all smell it, the discord between their alpha and his mate. And in a pack, discord was a weakness, a vulnerability. Katya naturally reveled in it. She missed no opportunity to make a pointed comment, her voice carrying just far enough for Vivienne to hear. An alpha needs a mate who is his strength, not a distraction, she'd said one afternoon in the common room, loud enough for several pack members to hear, one whose loyalty is beyond question. Vivienne pretended not to hear, but the words struck their intended target. She was a distraction, a weakness, and her loyalty was a lie. The note from Javier remained hidden, tucked away in a hollowed-out book in the library. She hadn't read it yet. She was too terrified. As long as it remained unread, she could pretend it didn't exist. She could try to repair the damage with Roman, to somehow earn back his trust without ever being truthful.
Her chance came 3 nights after Roman's early return. He was in his study, poring over patrol reports, a deep scowl etched on his face. The tension radiating from him was so thick she could feel it from the hallway. Taking a deep breath, she entered, carrying a tray with a decanter of his favorite whiskey and 2 glasses. He looked up as she entered, his expression guarded. "I thought you might want this," she said softly, setting the tray down on the corner of his massive desk. He stared at the tray for a moment before leaning back in his chair, his gaze lifting to her face. "What do you want, Vivienne?" he asked, his voice weary. "I want this to stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This coldness between us. I can't bear it, Roman. It feels like I'm suffocating." A flicker of the man she loved, the mate, surfaced in his eyes. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I don't know what you expect from me. You lied to me. I can still smell it in this room. Every time I look at you, my wolf growls. It tells me you are hiding something that could bring danger to us." "I'm not a danger to you," she pleaded, stepping closer to the desk. "I love you. I love this pack." "Love isn't enough when trust is gone." He shot back, his frustration boiling over. He stood up, his powerful frame seeming to fill the entire room. "I have spent my life protecting this pack. I have killed for it. I have bled for it. My father taught me that an alpha's greatest responsibility is the safety of his people. He also taught me that the most dangerous threats often come from within, disguised as something innocent." The words were a physical blow. Disguised as something innocent. That was her, the quiet human librarian. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and unstoppable. "Please," she begged, her voice a raw whisper. "Just tell me what I can do to fix this. I'll do anything." Seeing her tears, some of the anger drained out of him, replaced by his own deep-seated pain. The mate bond ached at the sight of her distress, even if she was the cause of it. He took a deep breath, the scent of her sorrow filling his senses, a scent that was inextricably mixed with the cloying aroma of her lie. He said, "Tell me the truth," his voice dropping to a low, intense plea. "Vivienne, I am begging you. Whatever it is, we will face it together. I can protect you from anything, but I cannot protect you from a secret I do not know. I cannot fight an enemy I cannot see." This was it, the final chance, the crossroad. Her heart screamed at her to tell him everything, to unburden her soul and let the pieces fall where they may. She opened her mouth,
the name of her father, the name of her past, on the tip of her tongue. But then the image of Javier's cold eyes at the gate filled her mind. He wants what belongs to him. Her father didn't just punish, he annihilated. He would not just come for her, he would come for Roman. He would see Roman's power, his alpha status as a challenge. He would take sadistic pleasure in dismantling him, piece by piece, before the eyes of his pack. He would make Roman suffer in ways she couldn't even imagine, before killing him.
Protecting her secret was no longer just about self-preservation. It was about protecting Roman from a monster whose existence he couldn't possibly comprehend. She closed her mouth, the confession dying on her lips. She had to be stronger. She had to handle this herself. "There is nothing to tell," she said, the lie feeling like a physical weight in her stomach. "I am sorry I lied about the note. I was scared and I handled it badly. It won't happen again. I swear it." The light in Roman's eyes died completely. The flicker of hope, the plea from the mate, was extinguished, leaving only the cold, hard gaze of the alpha. He had offered her his entire world, his strength, his protection, and she had thrown it back in his face. He stared at her for a long moment, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. "I see," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He walked around the desk, picked up the decanter of whiskey, and poured himself a glass. He didn't pour one for her. "Get some rest, Vivienne," he said, his back to her. "I have a long night of work ahead of me." It was a dismissal, clear and absolute. She turned and walked out of the study, the chasm between them now a vast, uncrossable canyon. She had made her choice. She had chosen to protect him by deceiving him. But as she walked through the silent halls of the pack house, a terrifying thought occurred to her. What if her deception was the very thing that would lead him to his doom? Chapter 7. A Secret Meeting. The oppressive tension in the pack house became Vivienne's new reality. She moved through her days like a ghost, her smiles strained, her interactions with the pack brief and superficial. Her nights were spent in the massive bed she still shared with Roman, but a chasm of cold sheets separated them. He would come to bed late and rise early, avoiding any chance for conversation. The physical intimacy they once shared, the casual touches and deep kisses, had vanished completely, leaving a void that ached with loss. Vivienne knew she couldn't live like this. The weight of her secret, coupled with Roman's cold anger, was crushing her. She had to do something. She had to face the threat. And that meant finally reading Javier's note. One afternoon, when she was certain she was alone, she retrieved the hollowed-out book from the library shelf. Her hands trembled as she took out the small, folded piece of paper. With a deep, steadying breath, she opened it. The note contained a time, a place, and a simple, chilling instruction. Midnight. The old mill by the river, 2 miles east of the border. Come alone, or the next message will be delivered to the Alpha. It wasn't a request. It was a summons, and it was for tonight. Panic seized her. The old mill was on neutral ground, but it was dangerously close to Blackwood territory. To go there was a monumental risk. If a patrol spotted her sneaking out, she would have no explanation. If Roman found out, any minuscule chance of rebuilding his trust would be shattered forever. But the alternative was worse. The thought of Javier or someone far more dangerous approaching Roman directly, she couldn't allow it. This was her mess. She had to be the one to clean it up. She spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened anxiety, every footstep in the hall making her jump. She had to devise a plan, a way to slip out of the pack house, past the guards and patrols, and get to the mill undetected. It seemed impossible. The werewolf's senses were too acute. They would hear her, smell her long before she ever reached the border. As evening fell, she pleaded a headache, a plausible excuse given the palpable stress she'd been under. She retired to their chambers early, hoping Roman would assume she was asleep when he eventually came to bed. She lay in the dark, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, listening to the sounds of the house settling for the night. Hours crawled by. Finally, she heard the heavy tread of his boots in the hallway. The door opened and closed softly.
He moved around the room in the darkness, his movements quiet and deliberate. She felt the bed dip as he lay down, his back to her, maintaining the cold distance between them. She lay perfectly still, feigning deep sleep, her breathing even and slow. It was the hardest acting she had ever done. She waited, for what felt like an eternity, until the sound of his breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of true sleep. Now was her chance. Silently, she slipped out of bed. She had already dressed in dark, practical clothing, which she'd hidden earlier in the day. She crept across the room, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. Her biggest challenge was the balcony. Their room was on the second floor, but a thick, ancient ivy vine snaked its way up the stone wall just to the side of it. It was a perilous route, but the only one that bypassed the guarded hallways. Her heart in her throat, she slipped onto the balcony, closing the door gently behind her. The night air was cold and the drop below looked terrifying. Taking a shaky breath, she grasped the thick, woody vine. It felt surprisingly sturdy. Saying a silent prayer, she began her descent. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her hands were scraped raw by the rough bark. But adrenaline and fear fueled her. She moved slowly, carefully, testing each handhold and foothold. Finally, her feet touched the soft grass of the garden below. She had made it out of the house. Now for the forest. Sticking to the deepest shadows, she moved like a wraith, her senses on high alert. The forest was alive at night, a symphony of rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the distant cry of an owl. To her, every sound was a potential patrol, every shadow a wolf ready to intercept her. Her destination was the eastern border. She knew from her studies in the library that it was the least heavily patrolled section of the territory, bordered by a swift-moving river that acted as a natural deterrent. It took her over an hour to reach it, her body aching, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. She hid in a thicket of ferns, peering through the leaves at the riverbank. As expected, there was no patrol in sight. The river was wide and the current strong, but a fallen log created a precarious bridge to the other side. Holding her breath, she scurried across it, her balance tenuous. The moment her feet touched the opposite bank, neutral territory, a strange sense of both dread and relief washed over her. She was outside the protection of the pack, but she was also outside their surveillance. The old mill was another mile's walk, a skeletal ruin silhouetted against the moonlit sky. It was eerily silent, the only sound the creaking of its dilapidated water wheel. As she approached, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the doorway. It was Javier. "You came," he said, his voice a low rasp. "I wasn't sure you'd have the nerve." "What do you want?" Vivienne demanded, stopping a safe distance away. She wrapped her arms around herself, not just from the cold, but to quell her trembling. "He wants nothing," he said with a shrug. "I'm just the messenger boy. Always have been." He gestured with his head. "He wants to talk to you." From the deeper shadows within the mill, a second figure emerged. This man was nothing like Javier. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, expensive-looking coat, and moved with a predatory grace that made the hair on Vivienne's arms stand on end. Even in the dim light, she could see the cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes. He was not a creature of brute force. He was something far more refined and far more deadly. "Callista, my dear, it has been far too long. You've been leading us on quite the chase. And Alpha's mate, I must say, I'm impressed. It's a bold move, even for you." Her blood ran cold. She knew this man. His name was Pearson. He was her father's most trusted lieutenant, his most ruthless enforcer. "Pearson," she breathed, her voice filled with loathing. "What is this?" "An invitation," Pearson said, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Your father misses you. He wants you to come home. He's displeased that you left without saying goodbye. He feels a debt has been created, a debt of loyalty, a debt of blood." "I am never going back," Vivienne snarled, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. Pearson's smile widened. "That is not the correct answer. You see, he's a collector. He always gets what is his, and right now, he considers you his most prized possession. He took a step closer, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. So, you will return with us now, quietly, and perhaps he will be lenient. Perhaps he will let your new pet and his pack of dogs live. The threat was clear, her life for theirs. But before she could respond, a new scent hit the air: pine, earth, and rage. A low, guttural growl ripped through the night, a sound of pure, unrestrained fury that shook the very foundations of the old mill. From the edge of the forest, a massive black wolf exploded into the clearing. Its golden eyes were blazing with incandescent rage, its lips curled back to reveal teeth like daggers. It was Roman, and he had seen everything. Chapter 8: The Fury of the Alpha. The moment Roman emerged from the tree line, the world seemed to shrink, collapsing into a vortex of terror and violence. He was no longer the man Vivienne loved. He was the Alpha, a primal force of nature unleashed. The air crackled with his power, and the scent of his rage was so potent it was almost suffocating.
Pearson, to his credit, didn't flinch. He simply raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his cold eyes. "Well, well," he murmured, "the pet himself. This complicates matters." Javier, on the other hand, went pale, taking several stumbling steps backward. He knew what a werewolf alpha in a rage was capable of. Roman didn't hesitate. With a roar that was part howl, part thunder, he launched himself across the clearing. He was a blur of black fur and raw power, his target not Pearson but Javier, the weaker of the two. Javier yelped, fumbling inside his coat for a weapon, but he was too slow. Roman crashed into him, the impact sending both of them tumbling. The sounds were horrific: the sickening crunch of bone, a strangled scream that was cut off abruptly. It was over in seconds. Roman rose, his muzzle stained with blood, and turned his blazing golden eyes on Pearson. Pearson had used the momentary distraction to produce a sleek silver pistol from his coat. He aimed it not at the wolf, but at Vivienne. "Call her off, Callista, or your lover gets a silver bullet for his trouble." Call him off? He thinks Roman is my pet? The absurdity of the thought was momentarily lost in the terror. "Roman, no!" Vivienne screamed. The sound of her voice, the plea in it, seemed to cut through Roman's rage. He froze, his massive body tensed, a low growl still rumbling deep in his chest. His eyes were locked on Pearson, but she knew he was listening to her. "This is your alpha?" Pearson sneered, his gaze flicking between the wolf and Vivienne. "How quaint. It seems you have a choice to make. Come with me, and he lives. Resist, and I will put him down like the dog he is." Vivienne's mind raced. Pearson was a master marksman. Even with a werewolf's speed, the distance was too short. Roman could be killed or gravely injured before he ever reached him. She had to de-escalate. She had to get Roman away from here. "Stand down, Roman," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She took a tentative step towards Pearson. "It's all right. Let me handle this." Roman let out a warning snarl, a clear disagreement. He did not move, a statue of black fury, but his eyes were fixed on her, questioning, betrayed. "Trust me," she whispered, the words a desperate prayer. This was her world. Pearson was a monster from her past, a past she understood. Roman, for all his power, was out of his element. Silver bullets and the cold, calculated cruelty of men like Pearson were not threats he was accustomed to. She turned her full attention to Pearson, her expression hardening into a mask of cold resolve she hadn't worn in years. "You will not touch him," she said, her voice dropping, losing its soft, librarian quality, and taking on a chillingly familiar authority. Pearson's smirk faltered. He recognized that tone. "So the little bird still has claws." "Let him go, Pearson," she continued, taking another step.
Let him walk away, and I will go with you. No tricks, no fights. Behind her, Roman's growl deepened, a sound of furious protest. He did not understand the deal she was making. He saw it only as a surrender, a betrayal.
A tempting offer, Pearson mused, though his gun remained steady. But my employer is not a man who likes loose ends. This alpha has seen my face. He presents a liability. He won't be, Vivienne promised. He won't come after you. I will make sure of it. That is my part of the deal. It was a stalemate. The air was thick with tension, a fragile truce held together by threats and promises. Vivienne stood between two monsters, a creature of the night, driven by primal love and fury, and a man whose evil was cold, precise, and utterly human. The decision was taken out of her hands. From the force behind Roman, more shapes began to emerge. First 2, then 4, then a dozen, an entire patrol of Blackwood wolves, drawn by the sound of their alpha's roar. They fanned out, a silent, menacing line of gray and brown fur, their eyes glowing in the dark. At their head was Axel, his form that of a large, grizzled gray wolf, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene with tactical precision. The odds had just shifted dramatically. Pearson's eyes widened slightly. He was good, but he was not good enough to take on an entire werewolf pack. His smirk finally vanished, replaced with a look of cold calculation. "It seems our negotiations have come to an end," he said, his voice tight. He began to back away slowly towards the deeper shadows of the mill. "This isn't over, Callista. He will have what he is owed, one way or another." With a final venomous glare, he turned and melted into the darkness of the ruined building. The moment he was gone, the tension holding Vivienne up snapped. Her legs gave way, and she sank to her knees, trembling uncontrollably. The world was a blur of movement. The patrol wolves held their positions, securing the perimeter. Axel shifted back into human form, clothes seemingly materializing on him from a bundle he must have carried. He knelt beside the body of Javier, checking for a pulse with a grim expression before shaking his head. And then there was Roman. He shifted, the violent, beautiful transformation happening in reverse. Where the massive wolf had stood, there was now the man, naked and magnificent in the moonlight, his body radiating a heat that was pure rage. His face was a thunderous mask, his golden eyes no longer holding any trace of love or pain, only a terrifying, arctic fury. He stalked towards her, his movements stiff, deliberate. He didn't offer her a hand, didn't check if she was hurt. He stood over her, his shadow falling upon her like a sentence. "Who is Callista?" he demanded, his voice a low, guttural growl that was more wolf than man. Vivienne looked up at him, her face stained with tears, her heart shattered into a million pieces. The secret was out. Not all of it, but enough. The lie was broken. She couldn't speak. She could only stare up at the face of the man she loved and see a stranger, an executioner. Axel approached them, his expression grim. "Roman, we need to get back, secure the territory. This man, the gesture to Pearson's escape route, he's a professional. This was a targeted—" "Silence," he snarled, never taking his eyes off Vivienne. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. The scent of Javier's blood was on his breath. "I asked you a question." "Roman, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Let me explain." "Explain," he repeated the word as if it were poison. "Explain the secret meetings, the lies. Explain why a man puts a gun to your head and calls you by another name, a name you answered to." He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and hauled her to her feet. "You will explain everything," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it scared her more than Pearson's gun. "Back at the house, in front of the entire pack. They deserve to know what kind of viper I have brought into our home." He dragged her with him, back towards the river, back towards the territory. The other wolves followed, a silent, grim procession. There was no comfort,
no protection. There was only the cold, hard grip of her mate and the terrifying certainty that her life, the beautiful, impossible life she had built with him, was over. Chapter 9. The Unraveling of a Life. The journey back to the pack house was a silent, agonizing ordeal. Roman's grip on her arm never loosened, a constant, painful reminder of his fury. He didn't speak, didn't even look at her. He just moved forward with a relentless, terrifying purpose. The pack followed behind them, their curiosity and suspicion a tangible weight on Vivienne's back. They didn't use the main entrance. Roman dragged her through a small private door that led directly into the great hall. The hall, usually a place of warmth and community, was dark and empty, but not for long. "Axel," Roman's voice boomed, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "Rouse the pack, every last one of them. I want them in this hall in 10 minutes. Axel, who had followed them in, hesitated. "Roman, perhaps this should be handled in private. It's an internal matter." "She is my mate," Roman roared, whirling to face his beta, his eyes blazing. "My choice to bring her here affects every single member of this pack. If she has put us in danger, they have a right to know. They have a right to see justice done. Now do it." The Alpha's command was absolute. Axel bowed his head, his expression deeply troubled, and left to carry out the order. Roman released Vivienne, shoving her towards the center of the room. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the great hearth, the stone cold beneath her trembling fingers. He began to pace before the hearth, a caged predator, his body radiating waves of controlled violence. He had pulled on a pair of pants Axel had brought for him, but his chest was still bare, the muscles tight with tension. Soon the pack began to file in. They came in ones and twos, then in larger groups, their faces a mixture of confusion, sleepiness, and concern. They saw their Alpha, his face like a thundercloud, and they saw Vivienne, pale and disheveled, and the room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. They formed a wide, intimidating circle around her, their eyes watchful, judging. She saw the elders, their faces stern. She saw Katya, a look of triumphant vindication on her face. When the entire pack was assembled, Roman stopped his pacing. He stood before the hearth, his back to the fire, and addressed his people. "For a year, I have asked for your trust," he began, his voice low and resonant, carrying to every corner of the hall. "I brought a human into our world, into our home. I named her my mate, my Luna. I told you she was to be respected, to be protected. I promised you she was not a threat." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he turned his head, his golden eyes pinning Vivienne where she stood. "I was wrong," he said, the words cutting through the silence like a blade. A collective gasp rippled through the pack. "Tonight, I followed her as she snuck out of our territory," Roman continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "I found her meeting with 2 men, hired killers, men who knew her by a different name." He turned his full, furious gaze back on Vivienne. "Her real name, it seems, is Callista." The name hung in the air. Murmurs broke out across the crowd, a wave of shock and suspicion. "These men threatened her. They threatened me," Roman said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "They spoke of debts, of her belonging to someone else, someone she has been hiding from, someone she has lied about since the day she arrived." He stalked towards her, stopping directly in front of her. The entire pack held its breath. "No more lies, Callista," he hissed, his voice for her ears only, yet the venom in it was palpable to everyone. "Who are you? Who is coming for you? Who did you lead to our door?" This was it, the final, terrible moment of truth. Surrounded by hundreds of werewolves who now saw her as a traitor, faced with the incandescent rage of the man she loved more than life itself, she knew there was no escape. The truth was all she had left. She took a shaky breath, her eyes scanning the hostile faces in the crowd, before finally landing on Roman's. She wanted him to see her face, to see the agony in her eyes as she finally confessed her sins. "My name, my birth name is Callista Thorne," she began, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried in the deathly quiet hall. A sharp intake of breath came from one of the elders at the front. His eyes were wide with a dawning horror. He recognized the name. "Thorne?" the elder breathed, his voice trembling. "It cannot be. Not that Thorne." Roman's head snapped towards the elder. "What is it, Marcus? What does that name mean?" Marcus looked from the Alpha to Vivienne, his face pale. "Alpha. Whitaker Thorne was a legend, but a dark one. A human, but more than a human. He was a hunter. Not just any hunter. He was the most brilliant, the most ruthless, the most sadistic pack killer of the last century. He didn't just hunt us for sport. He vivisected his prey. He tortured them for information, learning our ways, our weaknesses. The stories say he was a monster in human skin. He was responsible for the fall of the Silver Moon Pack, the Crimson Fang Pack, dozens of them. He was presumed dead, killed over a decade ago in a fire." Every word was another nail in Vivienne's coffin. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, turning from suspicion to outright hostility. The mate of their Alpha was the daughter of a legendary monster, a butcher of their kind. Roman's face had gone utterly, terrifyingly blank. The rage had receded, replaced by a chilling, absolute stillness. He turned back to Vivienne, his golden eyes seeming to pierce her very soul. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Vivienne could only nod, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she choked out, "Whitaker Thorne is my father, and he is not dead." The dam of Roman's control finally broke. It was not a shout, not a roar. It was a sound of pure primal agony and betrayal, a howl of a man whose heart had just been ripped from his chest. "He is the one who killed my predecessor," Marcus the Elder whispered in horror. "Alpha Vaughn. Thorne captured him 20 years ago. The state his body was found in?" He trailed off, unable to finish. The revelation struck the hall like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about a historical monster. This was personal. This was Blackwood Pack history. Their former Alpha, a beloved leader, had been tortured and murdered by this woman's father. Roman stared at her, his expression unreadable, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. The pieces were clicking into place. Her nightmares, her secrecy, the men who had come for her, it all made a horrifying, perfect sense. He had fallen in love with his pack's mortal enemy. He had slept beside her, shared his soul with her, and all the while she carried the blood of the man who had murdered his Alpha, his mentor. "I was running from him," Vivienne pleaded, her voice desperate. "I escaped. I changed my name. I never wanted this. I never wanted to bring this danger to you. I swear it, Roman. I love you." Her declaration of love, once the most precious thing in his world, now sounded like the hiss of a snake. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw nothing in his eyes. No love, no hate, no rage, just a vast, empty void. The mate bond, the sacred connection that had defined their existence, felt like it was shriveling, turning to ash. "You are the daughter of Whitaker Thorne," he said, his voice flat, dead. "You carry his blood, his deceit. You have lived in my home, slept in my bed, and all the while you were a ticking bomb waiting to destroy us all." He turned away from her, presenting his back to her in the ultimate gesture of rejection. He faced his pack, his expression now one of hard, unyielding authority. "The daughter of our greatest enemy is in our midst," he announced, his voice ringing with the cold finality of a judge. "She has lied. She has endangered us all. Her very presence here is an insult to the memory of Alpha Vaughn and every wolf Thorn has ever slaughtered." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his silent, waiting people. "She is no longer my mate," he declared, the words a death sentence to Vivienne's heart. "She is a prisoner." Chapter 10. The Alpha's Fury. The words, "she is a prisoner," echoed in the vast, silent hall. They were not just words, they were a severing, a final, brutal cut that severed the bond between them, or at least the version of it that had been built on love and trust. What remained was a twisted, agonizing connection of pure betrayal. Vivienne felt the shift in the very air around her. The pack was no longer just a collection of suspicious individuals. They were a unified entity, a single predator whose collective gaze was now fixed on its prey, her. The energy in the room was thick with hostility, a low, rumbling growl that was felt more than heard. Roman remained with his back to her, a granite wall of rejection. He hadn't looked at her since he passed his sentence. It was as if she had ceased to exist for him as a person and was now merely a problem to be dealt with. "Axel," Roman commanded, his voice cold and hard as iron. "Take her to the holding cells in the lower levels. Post 4 guards. No one is to speak to her. No one is to approach her cell. Understood?" The holding cells. They were reserved for the most dangerous of rogues and captured enemies, a place of cold stone, iron bars, and absolute isolation. Axel stepped forward, his face a grim mask of duty. He looked at Roman, then his gaze flicked to Vivienne, and for a moment she saw a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or regret, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the stoic resolve of a beta following his alpha's orders. "Come," Axel said, his voice quiet but firm. 2 other guards, large, intimidating wolves she recognized from the patrol, moved to flank him. They didn't touch her, but their presence was a cage in itself. Vivienne was frozen, unable to process the speed at which her world had imploded, from Luna to prisoner in the space of an hour. Her eyes were fixed on Roman's back. She needed him to turn around. She needed to see his face one last time to find some trace of the man she loved in the eyes of the Alpha who now condemned her. "Roman, please," she whispered, the sound pathetic even to her own ears. "Don't do this." He didn't move. He didn't speak. It was as if she had ceased to exist for him as a person and was now merely a problem to be dealt with. "It's what she deserves," Katya spat, her voice ringing with vindictive pleasure. "The filthy offspring of a hunter. She probably came here to finish what her father started." A murmur of agreement rippled through the pack. The fear and hatred, now given a voice, began to swell. "She should be torn apart," another wolf shouted from the back. "Let us have at her." The hostility was escalating, the pack's bloodlust rising. Axel and the guards tensed, moving closer to Vivienne, not out of protection for her, but to maintain order. The rising tide of violence was cut short by a single deafening roar from Roman. It was a sound of such absolute, unrestrained fury that it shook the very stones of the hall. The pack fell instantly silent, cowering before the sheer force of their alpha's rage. This was not the controlled anger of a leader. This was the raw, untamed fury of a wounded animal. He turned, finally, and the face he showed them was not the one Vivienne had been hoping for. It was terrifying. His golden eyes were blazing, his features twisted into a snarl of pure agony and hatred. His power flooded the room, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. "He is mine to deal with," he bellowed, his voice a guttural growl. "Her betrayal was against me. Her lies were told to me. I will be the one to decide her fate." And if any one of you so much as lays a hand on her before I have given the order, I will rip out your throat myself." The threat was not an exaggeration. Every wolf in the room knew it. The fury was not just for her deception, it was for his own failure. He, the alpha, had been blinded. He had been made a fool of, and his rage at his own weakness was now being projected outwards with devastating force. He stalked forward until he was once again standing before Vivienne. He was so close she could feel the heat rolling off his skin, smell the scent of his rage, acrid and overwhelming. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You have done this," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous torrent. "You have turned my home into a pit of hatred. You have broken the trust of my pack. You have brought the shadow of a monster to our doorstep. Everything I have built, you have poisoned with your lies." He reached out and grabbed the delicate moonstone pendant she always wore, a gift from him, a symbol of their status as Luna. With a sharp tug, he ripped it from her neck. The chain snapped, stinging her skin. He held the pendant in his fist for a second before his powerful hand clenched, and the sound of the stone crushing into powder was sickeningly loud in the silent hall. He opened his hand and let the glittering dust fall to the floor between them, a symbol of their love, their bond, destroyed. "Get her out of my sight," he snarled, turning his back on her once more. This time, Axel didn't hesitate. He gently but firmly took her arm, and with the two guards flanking them, led her out of the great hall. The pack parted for them, a sea of hostile, glowing eyes. No one spoke, no one moved. They just watched as their former Luna was led away like a common criminal. As they descended the stone steps to the lower levels, the sounds of the great hall faded, replaced by the damp chill of the earth. The fury of the Alpha had been unleashed, and its first victim was Vivienne's heart, which now lay in shattered, glittering pieces on the floor, just like the moonstone. Chapter 11. The Cell of Cold Truths. The holding cells of the Blackwood Pack were as bleak and unforgiving as the crimes of those they were built to contain. Carved out of the stone foundation of the pack house, the air was cold, damp, and heavy with the scent of earth and despair. The only light came from one single torch flickering in a sconce on the far wall, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock any hope of comfort. Axel led Vivienne to the last cell in the short corridor. The heavy iron door grated loudly as he unlocked it, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. He gestured for her to enter. The cell was small, bare except for a thin pellet of straw on the floor and a bucket in the corner. High on one wall was a tiny, barred opening that Vivienne suspected looked at ground level, offering no view of the sky, only the dirt and roots of the forest floor. She stepped inside, her movements numb and robotic. Axel followed, placing a rough wool blanket on the straw pallet. It was a small gesture, a flicker of humanity in an otherwise brutal situation, and it was enough to make her fragile composure crumble. A sob escaped her lips. Axel sighed, a heavy, weary sound. He closed and locked the cell door before turning to face her through the bars. "Why, Vivienne?" he asked, his voice low, filled not with the hatred of the pack, but with a deep, sorrowful confusion. "Why didn't you just tell him the truth from the beginning?" "You heard them," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "My father, he butchered your former Alpha. He's a monster. If I had told Roman who I was when I first arrived, he would have killed me on the spot, and he would have been right to do so." "And you think this is better?" Axel countered, gesturing around at the cold, dark cell. "Living a lie, letting him fall in love with a ghost. The Roman I know would have listened. He would have judged you on your own merit, not on the sins of your father." "No, you're wrong," she cried, clutching the bars of the cell. "You don't know my father. His evil is a contagion. Roman would have seen me as tainted, a risk he could not afford. And even if by some miracle he had accepted me, my father would have eventually found me. He would have come for me, and he would have destroyed all of this." She swept a trembling hand out, indicating the pack house above them, "out of sheer spite.
The lie was meant to protect him, to protect you all. Axel stared at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. Protection through deceit is a dangerous game. All you've managed to do is shatter the best man I have ever known. The fury you saw up there, that is the sound of a mate bond breaking. It is an agony I would not wish on my worst enemy. He feels every lie you ever told him like a fresh wound. Vivienne sank to the floor, her back against the cold stone wall, the truth of his words a crushing weight. She had thought only of the physical danger her father posed, not the emotional devastation her secret would cause. Will he be all right? She asked, the question small and pathetic. In time, Axel said, his voice grim. He is an alpha. He is strong. He will wall off the pain, bury it under duty and rage. He will survive, but he will never be the same. The part of him that loved you, that trusted you, you have killed it, Vivienne. He turned to leave, his duty done. Axel, wait, she called out. Pearson, the man at the mill, he is my father's lieutenant. He won't give up. He will be back. You have to warn Roman. They are more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. They hunt werewolves for a living. They know your weaknesses. Axel paused at the end of the corridor. He looked back at her, his silhouette dark against the torchlight. He knows, he said quietly. He is already preparing the pack for war. And with that, he ascended the stairs, leaving Vivienne alone in the suffocating darkness. The heavy sound of a door closing and a bolt being thrown echoed from above, sealing her in her stone tomb, alone with nothing but the cold, the dark, and the chilling truths she had tried for so long to outrun. She had lied to protect them, but her lies had only brought the monster to their door and shattered the heart of the only man she had ever loved.
She was a prisoner, not just of the Blackwood Pack, but of her own bloodline, her own devastating secrets. And as she curled up on the thin pallet, wrapping the rough blanket around her, she wept not for her own fate, but for the destruction she had brought upon this sanctuary, and for the kind, loving man she had turned into an engine of pure, righteous fury. Chapter 12. An Alpha at War. Roman did not sleep. He did not rest. The moment Vivienne had been taken from the Great Hall, he had transitioned from a betrayed mate into a wartime alpha. The pain, the gaping, bleeding wound in his soul where his love for her had been, was still there. It was a searing agony, a phantom limb that ached with a loss so profound it threatened to bring him to his knees. But he could not fall. He was the alpha. His pack was threatened. His personal pain was a luxury he could not afford. So he did as Axel predicted. He took that agony and he walled it off, brick by painful brick, burying it deep inside himself behind a fortress of cold, hard duty. What was left on the surface was pure, focused rage, a weapon he would now sharpen and aim at the enemy. He stood before a large map of the territory, spread out across the massive table in the war room, a chamber adjacent to his study. The pack's top trackers and warriors stood around him, their faces grim. Axel was at his side, reporting his findings. Javier, the man you killed, had nothing on him but a wallet with human currency and a burner phone, already wiped. The other one, Pearson, left no tracks. It's like he vanished into thin air. He's a professional, no doubt. He is more than a professional, Elder Marcus added, his voice grave. He had joined the council, his knowledge of the old histories suddenly vital. The men who worked for Whitaker Thorne were a special breed. They called themselves the Collectors. They were trained not just to kill, but to capture, to dismantle packs from the inside out. They are masters of stealth, infiltration, and psychological warfare. Roman slammed his fist on the table, the wood groaning in protest. He is a man. He bleeds and he dies like any other. Yes, Alpha, Marcus agreed, but he will not fight like a rogue wolf. He will not challenge you in the open. He will use silver, wolf's bane, fire. He will set traps. He will try to turn the pack against you. He will target the children, the elders. He will look for any weakness and exploit it without mercy. Roman's gaze was cold. Then we will have no weakness. He began issuing orders, his voice sharp and clear, leaving no room for argument. Axel, I want the territory locked down. Triple the border patrols. I want sentries posted every 500 yards, day and night. No one gets in or out without my express permission. Yes, Alpha. I want every pack member, male and female, over the age of 16 on a wartime footing. Training drills will commence at sunrise. We will practice anti-hunter tactics, silver countermeasures, fighting in enclosed spaces. The warriors around the table nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. All children and elders are to be moved to the central compound. They will not leave it under any circumstances. They will be guarded at all times.
He turned to a lean, scarred wolf named Silas, his best tracker. Silas, I want you to take a team and scout the perimeter for 5 miles in every direction. I want to know about any trap, any sign of human encampment, any trace of this Pearson. Do not engage. Report directly to me. It will be done, Alpha, Silas growled. One by one, he gave his commands, his mind a whirlwind of strategy and logistics. He was preparing his pack for the fight of their lives against an enemy whose sole purpose was their extermination. An enemy his mate, no, the prisoner, had let to their door. Hours passed. The sky outside began to lighten from black to a deep indigo. The War Council was dismissed, its members scattering to carry out their orders. Soon the sounds of the pack mobilizing echoed through the house. The calm rhythm of their lives had been shattered, replaced by the grim, urgent hum of a hive preparing for attack. Roman was left alone in the war room with Axel. The silence that fell was heavy. You should get some rest, Axel said, his voice quiet. You cannot lead them if you are exhausted. Roman didn't look up from the map. I'll rest when they are safe. He traced the eastern border with his finger, the spot where he had found her. The memory was a fresh stab of pain. Her face when she saw him, the way she had tried to bargain with that man, Pearson. Had she been trying to protect him, or was she trying to choose between her old life and her new one? It didn't matter. The result was the same. What are you going to do about her? Axel asked, voicing the question that hung in the air between them. Roman's hand clenched into a fist. She is a security risk. She holds information the enemy wants. She is the daughter of the man who murdered Alpha Vaughn. Tradition and law are clear on this matter. She should be executed for treason. The words were cold, clinical. He spoke of killing the woman he had professed to love just days before, as if he were discussing a tactical maneuver. Axel didn't flinch. And is that what you were going to do? Roman was silent for a long time. He stared at the map, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing her face, hearing her laughter, feeling the silk of her hair in his hands. He was remembering the scent of her, roses and sunshine, a scent that was now tainted with lies. The mate bond, though he had rejected it, was not so easily severed. It was still there, a tormented raw nerve that screamed in protest at the thought of her death. His wolf, which had been so enraged, was now whimpering in the back of his mind, a confused, heartbroken beast that wanted its mate back, regardless of the betrayal. To kill her would be to kill a part of himself, a part he now despised, but a part that was, nonetheless, his. I don't know, he finally admitted, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. The first crack in his iron facade, the first admission of the man beneath the alpha. I don't know. He pushed away from the table. The conflict within him was a raging storm. His duty as alpha demanded one thing, the remnants of his heart another. He needed to think, to escape the suffocating walls of the house that was filled with her memory.
He walked out onto the private balcony of his chambers, the same one where he had held her and promised to protect her from the shadows of her past. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. A new day was dawning, the first day of a war she had brought to him. His decision was no clearer, To kill her would be justice. To spare her would be what? Weakness? Mercy? Love? He hated that the word even entered his mind. He let out a frustrated growl, gripping the stone balustrade until his knuckles were white. One thing was certain. The woman known as Vivienne was gone. In her place was Callista Thorne, a prisoner, a traitor, and the key to the entire conflict. His war had two fronts, one against the enemy lurking in the woods, and one against the treacherous memories and the broken bond that still held his own heart captive. He wasn't sure which one would be harder to win. My Human Mate's Secret, The Alpha's Fury. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Stone. Time in the cell was a fluid, shapeless thing. Vivienne marked the passing of days only by the changing of the guards and the single meal that was slid through a slot at the bottom of the iron door. The darkness was a constant companion, broken only by the flickering torch in the hall. It gave her too much time to think, to relive every mistake, every lie, every stolen moment of happiness that now felt like a cruel joke. She replayed the night in the great hall over and over in her mind. The hatred in the pack's eyes, Katya's triumphant sneer, Roman's face, a mask of agony and rage. The sound of the moonstone crushing in his hand was a sound that would haunt her forever. He had destroyed the symbol of their bond, and in doing so, had tried to destroy the bond itself. But a mate bond was not a fragile stone. It was a living, breathing thing, and though it was wounded and bleeding, it was not dead. She could still feel him. It was no longer a warm, comforting presence at the edge of her senses. It was a raw, open wound, a constant throbbing ache that mirrored the agony she knew he must be feeling. His fury was a bitter poison that seeped through the bond, making her feel the sharp edges of his hatred for her. It was a unique and exquisite form of torture. On the third day, the routine changed. The food slot opened and the usual wooden bowl was pushed through. But this time, it was Axel's hand that appeared. He didn't say anything, but the gesture was significant. He was ensuring she was fed himself. Vivienne crawled over to the bowl. It was a hearty stew, still warm, far better than the cold ration she had been receiving. She ate slowly, the simple act of nourishment feeling like a monumental effort. When she was done, she pushed the bowl back to the slot. "Thank you," she whispered to the closed door, not knowing if he was still there. "Don't thank me." His voice came from the other side, low and strained. "I'm just making sure the Alpha's prisoner doesn't starve before he decides her fate." "How is he?" The question was a reflexive, desperate need. There was a long pause. "He is at war," Axel finally said, "with the enemy and with himself. He does not sleep. He barely eats. He is pure ice and fire. He is pushing the pack harder than they have ever been pushed." "The collectors, have they made a move?" she asked, her voice urgent. "No. The forest is quiet. Too quiet. Your father's men are disciplined. They are waiting, watching for a weakness." Vivienne pressed her forehead against the cold iron of the door. "They are creating a weakness, Axel. This is one of his tactics. The siege of silence. He surrounds his enemy, makes his presence known, and then does nothing. He lets fear and paranoia do the work for him. He will let the pack exhaust itself, let tensions rise, let them turn on each other from the stress of waiting for an attack that never comes. The first strike will not be from the outside. It will be a collapse from within." She could hear Axel's sharp intake of breath. This was specific, tactical information. It was not the plea of a frightened girl, but the analysis of someone who understood the enemy. "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "I grew up in his training camps," she said, her voice hollow. "I wasn't just his daughter. I was his student. I read his books. I studied his battle plans. I listened to his lieutenants boast about their victories. I know how he thinks. I know his playbook, chapter and verse." Another long silence. The weight of her confession hung in the damp air. She was not just the daughter of a monster.
She was a product of his teachings. He is testing your defenses, Axel, she continued, her voice gaining strength. He will send single scouts, unarmed, to see how far they can get before they are spotted. He will create small, meaningless diversions, a strange noise, a false trail, to gauge your patrol's reaction time. He is gathering intelligence, building a map of your weaknesses. Alpha's orders are clear, Axel said, his voice flat. No one is to speak with you. Then you are all walking into a trap with your eyes closed, she cried, her hands gripping the bars on the door's small window. Please, Axel, I don't care what happens to me. Execute me, exile me, I don't care. But don't let this pack be destroyed because of Roman's pride. Don't let him die because he hates me too much to listen. She heard him move away from the door. For a terrifying moment, she thought he had left, that her words had been for nothing. But then she heard his footsteps pacing in the corridor. The heavy, troubled tread of a man torn between his loyalty and his reason. She had given him a glimmer of her true value, not as a mate, not as a lover, but as a weapon. Now she could only wait in the dark and pray that he would choose to use her. Chapter 14. The Siege of Silence. Life in the Blackwood territory transformed. The relaxed communal atmosphere was replaced by a rigid military-like discipline. The sounds of children's laughter were gone, sequestered in the central compound. The scent of fear, sharp and acrid, was a constant undercurrent beneath the familiar smells of pine and smoke fire. Just as Vivienne had predicted, the attack did not come. The first week passed in a state of high alert. Every warrior on edge, every shadow a potential enemy. The second week began, and the tension started to fray. The constant drills, the doubled patrols, the lack of sleep, it was all taking a toll. Tempers grew short. Fights broke out over minor transgressions. The pack's formidable strength was being chipped away by paranoia and exhaustion.
Roman was the epicenter of this storm. He was a pillar of tireless strength, his presence everywhere at once. He inspected the borders, he led the training drills, he strategized late into the night. But those closest to him, like Axel, could see the cracks in his armor. His eyes were haunted, his face was gaunt, and the rage that fueled him was beginning to burn him out from the inside. Katya and her faction grew more vocal. The hunter spawn is a cancer in our midst, she declared one evening in the Great Hall. Her presence is a curse that drains our alpha and invites this shadow to our lands. We must cut her out before the poison spreads. Many, worn down by fear and fatigue, roared their agreement. They needed a target for their frustration, and the prisoner in the cells was the perfect one. Meanwhile, Axel was wrestling with his conscience. Vivienne's words haunted him. The first strike will not be from the outside. It will be a collapse from within. He was watching it happen in real time. He started observing the patrol reports more closely, looking for the patterns she had described. And he found them. A tracker reported a fresh human footprint found just inside the western perimeter, but it led nowhere, simply vanishing after a few yards. A sentry swore he heard a whistle, a human signal from the trees, but a thorough search revealed nothing. A small, deliberately set fire was found near the river, designed to create smoke but not to spread, a diversion that had drawn 2 patrols away from their posts for nearly an hour. Individually, they were minor, dismissible incidents, but together they painted the exact picture Vivienne had described. The collectors were testing them, mapping their responses. Axel knew he had to act. He found Roman in the war room staring at the map with hollow eyes. "We need to change our tactics," Axel said, foregoing any preamble. Roman looked up, his expression irritated. "What are you talking about? Our defenses are stronger than they have ever been." "They are predictable," Axel countered. "And our people are on the verge of collapse. We are playing their game. They are letting us defeat ourselves." "And what do you suggest we do?" Roman snarled. "Lower our guard? Invite them in for a meal?" "I suggest we start thinking like them," Axel said, his gaze steady. We need to understand our enemy's strategy, not just prepare for a brute force attack. And where do you propose we get this sudden insight into the mind of a pack killer? Roman demanded, his voice laced with bitter sarcasm. This was Axel's chance. He could tell him the truth, that the source was Vivienne, but he knew Roman's rage and pride would reject it out of hand. So he made a choice. He took a page out of Vivienne's book, and he lied. "I have been studying," Axel said, his voice even. "I sent scouts to the human towns, to their libraries. I had them retrieve any books they could find on military strategy, on hunter tactics. I have been reading them. And the patterns described, they match what is happening." It was a plausible lie. Roman stared at him, his suspicious Alpha's gaze searching for deceit. But Axel was his beta, his brother in all but blood. His loyalty had never been in question. Roman's shoulders slumped slightly, the anger deflating into sheer exhaustion.
"Fine," he sighed. "What have you learned?" For the next hour, Axel relayed everything Vivienne had told him, presenting it as his own research. He spoke of the siege of silence, of the intelligence gathering, of the psychological warfare. He suggested pulling back the patrols, making them less predictable, setting their own counter-traps and false trails to feed the enemy misinformation. As he spoke, a flicker of the old strategic Roman returned. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, calculating gleam. He was an alpha, a warrior. Strategy was his lifeblood. "It makes sense," Roman admitted, his voice grudging. He turned to the map, seeing it with new eyes. "They expect us to be predictable, honorable wolves. We will show them something else." They began to work, revamping the entire defensive strategy. For the first time in weeks, Roman was fully engaged, his mind sharp, his purpose clear. He was fighting back, not just waiting for the axe to fall. Axel watched him, a knot of guilt in his stomach. The lie felt heavy, but it was working. He had used the prisoner's knowledge to save the pack from its own alpha's blind spot. But he knew it was a temporary solution. The truth, like the enemy in the woods, was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Chapter 15, The Scent of Wolfsbane. Under the new strategy, a tense but more controlled calm settled over the pack. The patrols were less frequent but more varied, their routes unpredictable. The warriors, given more time to rest, regained their edge. Roman's energy seemed to be returning, his focus now entirely on outsmarting his unseen enemy. He and Axel spent hours in the war room, devising plans and counterplans, their old camaraderie resurfacing, albeit strained by Axel's secret. The collectors were not idle. They adapted. Since their probes were no longer yielding predictable results, they escalated. The first strike came not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious poison. It happened at the southern stream, a place where the pack's younger members often went to train in their wolf forms, learning to hunt and track under the watchful eyes of their mentors. One afternoon, a group of 5 adolescents were practicing when one of them, a young male named Leo, suddenly yelped and collapsed, his body convulsing. The others drew back in confusion and fear. Within moments, another she-wolf began to whine, her legs trembling before she too fell. Panic erupted. The training mentor, a seasoned warrior named Elias, immediately recognized the signs. "It's the water," he roared. "Get away from the water." He sent one of the faster wolves racing back to the pack house for help, while he tried to tend to the sick. Their gums were pale, their breathing was shallow, and a faint, acrid scent clung to their fur. Wolfsbane. Someone had poisoned the stream. It wasn't a lethal dose, not yet. It was a warning, a demonstration of their reach. "We can get to your children." When the news reached the Great Hall, a fresh wave of terror and fury swept through the pack. Their children had been targeted. The unspoken rules of engagement had been violated. Roman's reaction was terrifying. The cold, controlled strategist vanished, replaced by the incandescent rage of the alpha whose young had been threatened. He swept the strategic map off the war room table with a roar of fury, sending the carefully placed markers scattering across the floor. "Find them!" he bellowed to his warriors. "I want every inch of that forest scoured. I want the heads of the men who did this." Axel tried to intervene. "Roman,
This is what they want. They want you to react with blind rage, to send our forces out in a disorganized, vengeful mob. They will have traps waiting. I do not care, Roman snarled, his eyes blazing gold. They have gone too far. We will meet them with the full force of this pack and wipe them from the face of this earth. He was beyond reason. The attack on the pack's young was an attack on its future. An unforgivable line had been crossed. The pack, mirroring their alpha's fury, was clamoring for blood. The news of the poisoning reached the lower levels through the hushed, frightened whispers of the guards. When Vivienne heard what had happened and that the young were the targets, a cold, sickening dread filled her. She knew this tactic too. It was stage 2. After the psychological warfare came the targeted, non-lethal attacks designed to provoke an overreaction. She knew what came next. Her father would anticipate the furious, disorganized search party, and along the most obvious routes, he would have laid his deadliest traps, silver-laced nets designed to ensnare and maim, pits filled with sharpened stakes coated in concentrated wolfsbane, explosives triggered by tripwires. He would cripple Roman's best warriors without ever engaging them directly. She had to warn them. She began to bang on the iron door of her cell, screaming Roman's name until her throat was raw. The guards yelled at her to be silent, but she refused, her desperation giving her strength. "You have to get the Alpha!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the stone corridor. "He's walking into a slaughter. I know where the traps will be. Please, you have to listen to me." Her frantic cries were ignored. She was the enemy, the source of this curse. Her warnings were seen nothing more than the ravings of a traitor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, footsteps descended the stairs. It was Axel, his face pale and drawn. "Be quiet, Vivienne," he ordered, his voice strained. "You are only making things worse." "You have to stop him," she pleaded, her fingers wrapped around the bars of her cell. "Axel, he's playing right into my father's hands. It's a classic pincer move. He's using our own rage to lure our strongest fighters into a killing field." She began to describe the types of traps, the most likely locations, the way they would be camouflaged. Her knowledge was detailed, specific, and terrifying. Axel listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. He knew she was right. He could feel the truth of it in his bones. "He will not listen to me," Axel said, his voice heavy with despair. "The Alpha is in control, and the Alpha's first duty is to avenge an attack on his young." "Then you are letting him lead his men to their deaths," she sobbed. Axel's face was a mask of conflict. His loyalty to Roman was absolute, but his duty was to the pack, and the pack was about to be decimated because of its Alpha's grief-stricken rage.
He looked at her, at the desperate sincerity in her tear-filled eyes. He had a choice to make: obey his Alpha and watch his pack brothers walk into a slaughter, or trust the daughter of their greatest enemy. "I will try," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned and sprinted back up the stairs, leaving Vivienne alone with the terrifying knowledge of what was about to happen. She could only pray that his words would be enough to pierce the thick hide of Roman's fury. Chapter 16. The Beta's Treason. Axel found Roman in the armory, strapping silver-laced vambrances to his forearms. His best warriors were gathered around him, their eyes glowing with bloodlust. The hunting party was preparing to depart. They were a force of nature, an engine of vengeance, and they were about to drive off a cliff. "Roman, wait," Axel said, his voice cutting through the din of sharpening blades and growled promises of retribution. Roman turned, his eyes narrowed. "The time for talk is over, Axel. We are hunting." "You are being baited," Axel insisted, stepping in front of his Alpha, a clear act of defiance. The other warriors fell silent, watching the two most powerful wolves in the pack face off. "The poisoning was a lure."
They are waiting for you." "Let them wait," Roman snarled. "They will find that Blackwood wolves are not so easily trapped. They have silver nets, wolfsbane pits, explosives. They will be placed along the most direct routes from here to the southern stream, in the narrow passes under the cover of the thickest brush. They are expecting you to be driven by rage, not strategy, and you are proving them right." Roman's eyes widened slightly. The specificity of the warning, the tactical assessment, was enough to give him a moment's pause. His rage was still a roaring inferno, but Axel's words were a splash of ice-cold water. "Your books told you this?" Roman asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Axel held his alpha's gaze. The lie had run its course. The stakes were too high now for anything but the truth. "No," he said, his voice clear and steady. "She did. The prisoner." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. The rage returned to Roman's face tenfold. He shoved Axel back, his strength sending his beta stumbling. "You have been speaking with her," Roman roared, his voice shaking the weapons on the walls. "You have been going behind my back, taking counsel from that viper. I gave you a direct order." "My duty is to the pack," Axel roared back, finding his footing, his own wolf rising to the surface in the face of the alpha's challenge. The confrontation was unprecedented. A beta did not shout at his alpha. He did not question his command in front of the warriors. It was an act of supreme loyalty and supreme treason all at once. For a heart-stopping moment, the two wolves were on the verge of violence. Roman's hands were clenched into fists, his muscles coiled, ready to strike. Axel stood his ground, his chin lifted in defiance, ready to accept the consequences. The other warriors looked on, their own bloodlust forgotten in the face of the schism between their leaders. It was Roman who broke the stalemate. He let out a long, ragged breath, the fury in his eyes receding just enough to let a sliver of logic through. Axel had never defied him before, not once in their long years together. He would not do so now unless he believed with every fiber of his being that he was right. "She told you this?" Roman asked again, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble. "She described the traps?" "In detail," Axel confirmed. "She says she knows her father's playbook." Roman stared at Axel, the storm in his eyes a terrifying thing to behold. The woman he despised held the key to his pack's survival. The ultimate bitter irony. To trust her was to admit that some part of her was not her father, that some part of her was loyal to them. To ignore her was to risk the lives of his men on the altar of his own pride. "Silas," Roman said, his voice cold. He turned to his best tracker. "Take 2 of your quietest men. Forget the stream. I want you to circle wide, come in from the northeast, downwind. Approach the narrow pass 2 miles south of here. Do it from the ridge. Look down into it. I want to know what you see. Do not be seen. Do not engage. Report back." Silas nodded, his expression grim. It was a reconnaissance mission, not a hunting party. The alpha had listened. Roman turned his back on the assembled warriors, his shoulders slumped. "Disperse," he ordered, his voice heavy. "The hunt is on hold." The warriors, confused but obedient, began to file out of the armory, leaving Roman and Axel alone. The silence was thick with the fallout of their confrontation. "You have defied me and you have lied to me," Roman said, his back still to Axel. "You went to my enemy for counsel. I did what I thought was right for the pack. My loyalty is to you, Roman, but I will not follow you into a massacre." "When Silas returns," Roman said, his voice dangerously soft, "if he finds nothing, I will have your hide for this, Beta. I will strip you of your rank and cast you out myself." "I understand," Axel said, accepting the ultimatum. "And if he does find something," Roman continued, finally turning to face him, his eyes filled with a pain that was deeper than anger, "then pray for the souls of our enemies. and pray for mine, because I will have to face the fact that the only person who can save us is the one who has already destroyed me. Chapter 17. The Confrontation in the Dark. An hour later, Silas returned. He was pale, his usual stoicism replaced with a look of sheer horror. "Alpha," he reported, his voice strained. "It was exactly as you said. The pass is filled with traps. Silver nets strung between the trees so fine you can't see them. A deadfall trap rigged to a tripwire. And the ground, it smells of freshly dug earth. Wolfsbane pits, for certain. We would have run right into it. The whole patrol would have been crippled." The words landed like hammer blows in the silent war room. Axel's treason had been vindicated. Vivienne's warning had been true. She had saved their lives.
Roman's face was a mask of stone, but Axel could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. He gave Silas a curt nod. "Double the guard on the children. Get some rest. You've earned it." As Silas left, Roman sank into his chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He had been so consumed by his own pain and rage that he had almost led his men to their deaths. He had allowed his personal feelings to cloud his judgment as an alpha. It was a profound failure, and it shook him to his core. And at the center of it all was her, the prisoner, the traitor, the savior. He stood up, his movement stiff. "I'm going to see her," he said, his voice flat. Axel put a hand on his shoulder. "Roman, be careful. Your bond." "My bond is a ghost," Roman bit out, shrugging off his beta's hand. "I am going to get information, nothing more." He descended the stone steps to the lower levels alone. The flickering torchlight seemed to mock him, illuminating the path to the woman who was both his poison and his antidote. He stopped before her cell, the iron bars separating them feeling like an insurmountable barrier. Vivienne was huddled on the straw pallet, but she looked up as he approached, her eyes wide and fearful in the dim light. She looked smaller in the cell, more fragile. The confident, happy woman he had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by this haunted, desperate creature. "You were right," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He did not offer thanks. He simply stated the fact. "The warriors?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are they safe?" "No thanks to me," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. He gripped the bars, his knuckles white. "How did you know? How did you know every detail so precisely?" "I told Axel. I studied my father's tactics. He was proud of his work. He called it an art." "An art?" Roman repeated, the words filled with loathing. "The art of butchery." He stared at her. The conflict in his soul was a raging tempest. "What is this, Callista? What game are you playing? Is this some twisted plot you concocted with your father? You lead him here, then you save us to earn our trust just before you plunge the knife in for good?" The accusation, so cruel and so far from the truth, finally broke through her fear. Igniting a spark of anger, she scrambled to her feet and faced him through the bars, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen since the night he'd found her at the mill. "Game?" she cried, her voice ringing with a pain that was almost as deep as his own. "You think this is a game? I have spent every moment since I met you caught between two nightmares. One is my father, a monster who would kill you for sport, and the other is losing you. The lie was to protect you from the first nightmare, and the truth has brought the second one to life." Tears streamed down her face, but her gaze was fierce. "I have nothing left to lose, Roman. My life with you is over. You've made that clear. My old life is a death sentence. All I have left is the desire to see the people I came to love, the pack I came to see as my own, survive the storm that I brought down on them. So use me, use my knowledge, and when it's all over, do what you want with me. But stop, for 1 second, stop thinking that any of this is about anything other than saving you."
Her raw, desperate confession struck him with the force of a physical blow. The agony in her voice, the truth shining in her eyes. Not even his rage could blind him to it now. He saw her not as a traitor, but as what she was, a terrified woman trapped in an impossible situation who had made a catastrophic mistake out of love. The mate bond, the ghost he had tried to deny, flared between them, a searing connection of shared pain. His wolf howled in his mind, recognizing its mate's anguish, wanting to comfort, to protect. But the man was still too wounded. He took a step back from the cell, his composure shattered. He had come down here for information, to treat her as a strategic asset. But it was impossible. She was not an asset. She was the other half of his soul, a soul he had tried to rip in two. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the stone corridor. He did not give her an answer. He did not offer her hope. He left her in the darkness, alone with her confession. But as he ascended the stairs, he knew one thing with a terrifying certainty. He could no longer deny the truth. He needed her. The alpha needed the prisoner, and the man needed his mate. He was at war with his enemies, and he was at war with himself, and he was losing on both fronts. Chapter 18. The Trial by Fire. Roman's confrontation with Vivienne changed him. The icy, vengeful rage that had been driving him was gone, replaced by a grim, weary resolve. He had been humbled. He had been forced to accept that his hatred was a liability his pack could not afford. He called a meeting with Axel and the elders. "The prisoner has knowledge we need to survive," he announced, his voice flat. "She will be moved from the cells to a secure room in the tower. She will be given maps, patrol reports, everything she needs. She will act as a strategic advisor." The elders were aghast. "Alpha, you cannot," Marcus protested. "To give the hunter's daughter access to our defenses? It's madness." "Her knowledge has already saved the lives of a dozen of our best warriors," Roman countered, his voice like steel. "My pride has already cost us dearly. I will not let it cost us any more lives. She will be guarded at all times, but she will be heard." The news that the traitor was now advising the Alpha sent a shockwave of confusion and anger through the pack. Katya was incensed, seeing it as the ultimate betrayal. She rallied her supporters, their fear and paranoia fueling their outrage. "He is bewitched by her," Katya proclaimed in the great hall. "She is a spy, whispering poison in his ear, leading us to our doom. We must have a trial by fire. Let the ancient laws decide her fate." A trial by fire was an archaic, brutal tradition, reserved for the most heinous of crimes. The accused was forced to walk over a bed of glowing coals. If they were innocent, the spirits would supposedly protect them from harm. In reality, it was a death sentence. Roman knew he could not ignore the demand. The pack's morale was at a breaking point. They were a powder keg of fear and suspicion, and Katya was holding the match. To deny them their trial would be to risk a full-blown mutiny.
He stood before the assembled pack, his face grim. "There will be a trial," he announced, his voice silencing the angry shouts. "But it will not be a barbaric appeal to superstition. It will be a trial of loyalty. Tomorrow, we will march on the enemy. We will find their camp, and we will destroy it. The prisoner, Callista Thorne, will come with us. She will guide us. She will walk at the head of the column at my side." A stunned silence fell over the hall. This was more dangerous than a bed of coals. She would be the first to walk into any trap, the first to face any ambush. "She will have no weapon," Roman continued, his golden eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Her only protection will be the truth of her counsel. If her advice is true, she will lead us to victory. If she is lying,
If she leads us into a trap, then she will be the first to die. That will be her trial, a trial by fire and steel. We will see where her loyalties truly lie on the battlefield. It was a brilliant, terrifying gambit. It satisfied the pack's need for justice while simultaneously using Vivienne as their greatest weapon. Her life was now directly tied to the success of their mission. Axel brought Vivienne the news in the tower room where she was being held. It was a comfortable chamber, a far cry from the cell, but the 2 guards outside the door were a constant reminder of her status. When Axel told her of Roman's plan, she went pale. "He wants me to walk into my father's camp?" she breathed, her heart hammering. "He wants you to prove yourself," Axel said, his expression unreadable, to him and to the pack. Vivienne looked at the maps spread before her, at the patrol reports she had been studying. For days, she had been piecing together the collectors' movements, anticipating their strategies. She had located what she believed to be their primary encampment, a series of hidden caves in the rocky hills to the east. It was a highly defensible position. To attack it would be perilous. "It's a suicide mission," she whispered. "Then we will die together," Axel replied simply. "The pack is ready. They are tired of hiding. They are ready to fight. Roman has given them a purpose, and he has given you a chance." A chance. It was more than she had hoped for. A chance to save them. A chance to prove that she was more than just her father's daughter. A chance, however slim, to earn back an ounce of the trust she had shattered. "All right," she said, her voice filled with a new, steely resolve. She turned back to the maps. "If we are going to do this, we are going to do it my way. My father expects an army of furious wolves. We will not give him that. We will give him ghosts." For the rest of the night, she, Axel, and a reluctant Roman worked. She laid out a daring, intricate plan, not a frontal assault, but a campaign of infiltration and sabotage. She knew the layout of a standard collector camp, the watch patterns, the chain of command, the psychological weaknesses of the men who served her father. She was in essence drawing a blueprint for their own destruction. Roman watched her, his expression a mixture of awe and revulsion. She moved around the map with a chilling confidence, her mind sharp, her strategic sense as honed as any warrior. He was seeing the part of her that was Whitaker Thorne's daughter. But now, that part of her was being turned against its creator, wielded as a weapon for the survival of his pack. He hated that he needed her, but he could not deny the brilliance of her plan. As dawn approached, they were ready. The pack assembled in the pre-dawn gloom, not as a roaring mob, but as a silent, disciplined force. Roman stood before them, magnificent and imposing in his battle gear. He looked at Vivienne, who stood beside Axel, pale but resolute. "Today we end this," Roman declared to his pack. "We fight not with blind rage, but with cold purpose. We fight for our homes, for our young, for our future. Trust the plan. Trust your leaders, and trust that justice will be done." He turned and looked directly at Vivienne. Their eyes met across the small distance, and in his gaze, she saw no softness, no forgiveness, but she saw a flicker of something else, a reluctant trust, a warrior's respect. "Let the trial begin," he said, his voice low, and together they led the Blackwood Pack into the woods, marching towards a battle that would decide all of their fates. Chapter 19. The Ghosts in the Woods. The journey to the collector's encampment was a masterclass in stealth orchestrated by Vivienne. The pack did not move as a single large unit. Instead, she had them break into a dozen small independent cells, each led by a skilled tracker. They communicated with silent hand signals and meticulously planned bird calls, a language she had devised that Roman's warriors learned with impressive speed. They were no longer a charging army. They were ghosts, flitting through the undergrowth, their movements synchronized, their presence almost undetectable. Vivienne walked in the center of the formation, flanked by Roman and Axel. She was their guide, her senses attuned not to the sense of the forest, but to the memory of her father's cruel logic.
"There will be a listening post on that ridge," she'd whisper, pointing to a rocky outcrop. "They'll use a sniper team as overwatch. We circle north, using the ravine for cover." My father loves perimeter traps, but not simple tripwires. He uses pressure plates buried under the leaf litter, connected to crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts. "Everyone, walk only where I walk." She led them on a winding, counterintuitive path, her steps confident, her knowledge unnervingly precise. The warriors followed without question now. They had seen the trap she had warned them about, disarmed by Silas's team who had scouted ahead. Her words were no longer the claims of a traitor, they were the gospel of their survival. Roman watched her, a silent, brooding presence at her side. He was forced to trust her every instinct, every command. Each time her advice proved true, each trap she helped them bypass, it was both a relief and a fresh twist of the knife. It was undeniable proof of her value and undeniable proof of how deeply enmeshed she had been in the world he despised. The woman he knew as a gentle librarian was peeling away, layer by layer, revealing the hardened survivor beneath. A woman forged in the heart of the enemy's camp.
As they drew closer to the caves, the tension became almost unbearable. They could now smell them, the faint, alien scent of multiple humans, of cooked food, of gun oil. "This is where it gets difficult," Vivienne murmured, gathering Roman, Axel, and the other cell leaders. They were hidden in a thicket overlooking the entrance to the cave system. "The entrance will be a kill zone, heavily mined and guarded. A direct assault is suicide." "What do you suggest, General?" Katya's voice dripped with sarcasm. She was part of the command group, her skill in fighting too valuable to leave behind, but her hostility towards Vivienne had not waned. Vivienne ignored the jibe, her eyes fixed on the caves. "My father is arrogant. He always builds a weakness into his strongholds, a bolt hole, a secret escape route for himself, known only to his most trusted officers." He pointed to a section of the rock face, far to the left of the main entrance, that looked like solid stone. "There, behind that curtain of ivy, there's a fissure, just wide enough for one man to squeeze through. It leads into the back of the cave system, behind their main guard post." "How can you be sure?" Roman asked, his voice a low growl. Vivienne's gaze became distant, her expression shadowed with a painful memory. "Because I helped him dig it," she said softly. "It was my job to clear the rubble. He said small hands were good for tight spaces." The quiet confession stunned them into silence. They were not just using her knowledge, they were using her trauma, her history of abuse as a weapon. The look on Roman's face was complex, a flicker of something that looked dangerously like compassion warring with his hardened resolve. "The plan is simple," Vivienne continued, her voice regaining its strength. "We create a diversion at the main entrance, a small team making a lot of noise, draw their attention. While they are focused on the front, a second team, our best fighters, will go through the fissure. They will neutralize the command structure from within. Pearson will be there, possibly my father himself." "It's too risky," Katya sneered. "She's leading you into a trap." "It is our only chance," Roman said, his voice leaving no room for argument. His eyes were fixed on Vivienne. He was making a choice. He was betting the lives of his pack and his own on her word. "Axel, you lead the diversion team. Take Katya with you. Silas, you're going through the fissure. You will come with us. You know the layout." This was the final test. She would not just guide them, she would walk into the heart of the beast's lair with them. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. As Axel and his team moved into position, Roman turned to Vivienne. They were alone for a moment, hidden in the deep shadows. "If this is a betrayal, Callista, if you are lying, I will not wait for the enemy to kill you. I will do it myself, right before they kill me." "I know," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "But it's not a lie. Tonight, I am not her daughter. I am the Luna of the Blackwood Pack, and I will not see my pack fall. The title, which he had stripped her from, hung in the air between them. It was a defiant claim, a promise.
Before he could respond, a shout echoed from the front of the caves, followed by the crack of gunfire. Axel's diversion had begun. "It's time," Roman growled, and without a backward glance, he slipped behind the curtain of ivy, leading his elite team, with his prisoner-turned-general at his side, into the darkness of the enemy's heart. Chapter 20. The Heart of the Beast. The fissure was exactly where Vivienne had said it would be. It was a claustrophobic, suffocating passage, the rock pressing in on all sides. They moved in single file, the scraping of their gear against the stone sounding deafeningly loud in the confined space. Vivienne was in the lead, her small frame navigating the tight passage with a grim familiarity. Roman was directly behind her, his senses on high alert, his powerful body filling the space. He could feel her tension, smell the fear coming off her, but it was mingled with a steely resolve that he was beginning to respect against his will. The passage opened into a small, dark cavern. The air here was stale, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and smoke. Distantly, they could hear the sounds of the firefight at the main entrance, shouts, gunfire, and the occasional furious roar of a wolf. Axel's team was selling the diversion perfectly. "This way," Vivienne whispered, her voice barely audible. "The command center should be just ahead. It's a larger cavern where my father liked to set up his maps." They moved like wraiths through the interconnected tunnels, their soft-soled boots making no sound on the rocky ground. They passed storerooms filled with horrific implements, cages, silver chains, branding irons. They saw sleeping quarters, the men absent having been drawn to the fight at the entrance. Finally, they saw a light ahead. Vivienne held up a hand, and the team flattened themselves against the rock. She peered around the corner. In the center of a large cavern, illuminated by gas lanterns, stood 3 men. 2 were heavily armed guards. The third was Pearson. He was bent over a large table, listening to a radio crackle with reports from the main entrance. "Hold position there." Pearson's voice was sharp, authoritative. "It's just a probe, a foolish Alpha-led charge. Let them waste their energy. We will capture the Alpha alive. Thorne wants him for a demonstration." Roman's hands clenched, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Vivienne put a calming hand on his arm, a gesture so instinctive it startled them both. Her touch was a spark on his skin, a reminder of a connection he had tried to kill. He looked down at her, and in the dim light, their eyes met. 1,000 unspoken words passed between them in that single fraught moment. "My father, is he here?" Vivienne whispered, her eyes searching the cavern. "No," Pearson said into the radio, unknowingly answering her question. "The master is en route. He wishes to be here for the final act. Keep the Alpha alive at all costs." Relief and dread washed over Vivienne in equal measure. Her father wasn't here, but he was coming. Their time was limited. Roman gave the signal. The attack was a blur of speed and brutal efficiency. Before the guards could even turn, Silas and another warrior were on them, silent and deadly. Roman launched himself at Pearson. Pearson was fast. He dropped the radio and spun, a long silver-bladed knife appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. He was no ordinary human. He moved with a supernatural grace, his movements precise and deadly. He lunged, not at Roman, but at Vivienne. He knew she was the key. Roman intercepted him, his own hunting knife clashing against Pearson's. The sound of steel on steel rang through the cavern. The two were locked in a deadly dance, a whirlwind of feints, parries, and strikes. Roman had the strength and raw power, but Pearson had the skill and the cold, unfeeling precision of a master duelist. Vivienne was frozen for a split second, watching the man she loved fight the monster from her past. Then her training, the survival instincts her father had so cruelly beaten into her, took over. She scanned the cavern, her eyes landing on the table. It was covered with maps of the Blackwood territory, patrol routes marked in red. There were also schematics, detailed drawings of traps. And in the center of the table was a satellite phone, her father's direct line. While Roman kept Pearson occupied, she darted to the table. She began grabbing the maps, the schematics, stuffing them inside her jacket. This intelligence was invaluable. It was the proof she needed, the key to their long-term survival. Pearson saw what she was doing.
With a snarl of frustration, he kicked a crate into Roman's path, creating a momentary opening. He feinted left, then spun right, throwing his silver knife with deadly accuracy. It was aimed at Vivienne's heart. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. There was no time to dodge. She saw the silver glint as it flew through the air. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. There was a sickening thud and a sharp grunt of pain. Her eyes flew open. Roman stood in front of her, his body shielding hers. The hilt of Pearson's knife was protruding from his left shoulder. "Roman!" she screamed. The pain seemed to fuel him. With a roar of pure fury, he ignored the weapon in his shoulder and charged Pearson, his rage giving him the opening he needed. He disarmed the man with a brutal blow that broke his wrist and then slammed him against the cavern wall, the impact knocking the air from Pearson's lungs. "This ends now," Roman growled, his hand closing around Pearson's throat. But Pearson was a survivor. His other hand fumbled inside his coat, and he pulled out a small spherical object, a grenade. "We all die together, dog," Pearson rasped, his thumb on the pen. Before he could pull it, a gunshot echoed through the cavern. A neat, precise hole appeared in the center of Pearson's forehead. His eyes went white with surprise, and he crumpled to the ground, dead. Roman stared down at the body, then looked up in stunned silence. Standing at the entrance of the cavern, a smoking pistol in her hand, was Katya. She had followed them, a shadow in the darkness. Her face was a mask of shock and grim satisfaction. "I will not have a human kill my alpha," she said, her voice shaking slightly. The immediate threat was over. But Roman was swaying on his feet, his face pale, the silver knife still embedded in his shoulder, its poison already beginning to seep into his system. He looked at Vivienne, his eyes clouded with pain, and then he collapsed. Panic erupted. The silver was acting fast, its poison coursing through Roman's werewolf physiology with deadly speed. His breathing was becoming shallow, his skin taking on a grayish pallor. "We have to get the knife out," Silas shouted, rushing to his alpha's side. "No," Vivienne's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and authoritative. "The blade is barbed. If you pull it out, it will shred the artery. He'll bleed out in minutes." She was at Roman's side in an instant, her hand surprisingly steady as she examined the wound. The knowledge came from a dark place, from watching her father's men treat similar injuries. "Katya, your gun," Vivienne commanded. Katya looked at her with renewed suspicion. "Why?" "The satellite phone," Vivienne said, pointing to the table. "Shoot it. Now, my father cannot know that Pearson has failed." Katya hesitated, then seeing the cold logic, she raised her pistol and fired, shattering the device. "Silas, we need fire, a lot of it, and find me a thin metal rod and bandages. Rip up shirts if you have to." The warriors, accustomed to taking orders from their alpha, were now looking at this human woman, this prisoner, for guidance. Seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes, they obeyed without question. While they scrambled to build a fire and find supplies, Vivienne turned her attention back to Roman. He was semi-conscious, his golden eyes glazed with pain. She leaned down, her face close to his. "Roman, stay with me," she whispered, her voice fierce. "That is an order." A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "Haven't you caused enough trouble?" he rasped. "I'm just getting started," she replied, her own fear held at bay by a sheer force of will. Silas returned with a branding iron from one of the storerooms. It was a horrific tool, but its metal rod was perfect. Vivienne directed him to heat the tip in the fire until it was glowing red. "This is going to hurt," she said softly to Roman, stroking his sweat-damp hair from his forehead. "I am so sorry." "For the knife or for everything?" he whispered, his eyes searching hers. "For everything," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. When the iron was ready, she took a deep breath. "Hold him down," she told the others. This was the part she had only seen once, a brutal piece of field medicine for silver wounds. "I have to cauterize the wound from the inside, seal the artery before I can remove the blade." The next few minutes were a hellish ordeal. As Vivienne carefully inserted the glowing iron into the wound alongside the knife, Roman's roar of agony was a sound that would be seared into all of their memories forever. The smell of burning flesh filled the cavern. Katya had to turn away, her face pale.
But Vivienne's hand was steady, her focus absolute. She worked with the surgeon's precision, her movements guided by a dark and terrible knowledge. When it was done, she carefully, slowly pulled the silver knife free. The bleeding was minimal. The wound was cauterized. She then packed it with herbs she recognized from the pack's infirmary, which one of the wolves had in his pack, and bound it tightly with strips of cloth. The immediate crisis was over. Roman was unconscious, but his breathing was deeper, the color slowly returning to his face. She had saved his life. She sagged against the cavern wall, the adrenaline leaving her, her body trembling with exhaustion and reaction. She had done it. She had faced her past and used its ugliest lessons to save her future. The sound of the fighting outside had died down. Soon Axel appeared at the entrance to the cavern, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but his eyes wide with relief when he saw them. "It's over," he announced. "The few who weren't killed have fled. We've won." His gaze fell on Roman's still form, and then to Vivienne, who was slumped on the floor, covered in his blood. He looked at the dead body of Pearson, at Katya holding the pistol, and he pieced together what had happened. He walked over and crouched in front of Vivienne. He looked at her, and for the first time since her secret had been revealed, his expression was one of unequivocal respect. "The pack is safe," he said softly. "You did it." Vivienne just shook her head, tears finally tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. "We did it," she corrected. She had faced her trial. She had walked through fire and steel, and she had not betrayed them. She had bled for them, fought for them, and saved their alpha. She was no longer Callista Thorne, the hunter's daughter. She was Vivienne, and she had made her choice. She had chosen her pack. Chapter 22. The Scars That Bind. The journey back to the pack house was a somber, triumphant procession. They carried their wounded, with Roman at the head of the column, borne on a makeshift stretcher. He remained unconscious, his body fighting the lingering effects of the silver poison, but his life was no longer in immediate danger, thanks to Vivienne. The pack members who had remained behind greeted them with anxious cries, which turned to cheers of victory when they saw the defeated state of their enemies who had been taken prisoner. But the cheers died down when they saw their alpha's still form. Vivienne walked beside the stretcher, her hand resting lightly on Roman's arm, as if she could will him to heal through her touch alone. No one stopped her. No one questioned her place at his side. They had all heard the story of what had happened in the cave, of her knowledge, her bravery, her brutal, life-saving actions. Katya, surprisingly, had been the one to tell the tale with a grudging respect, her own role in the events giving her words the weight of truth. The trial by fire and steel was over. Vivienne had not only survived, she had triumphed. She was no longer seen as a traitor, she was their savior. For the next 2 days, she did not leave Roman's side. The pack's healers tended to him, but Vivienne was a constant presence in his chambers. She bathed his brow, changed his bandages, and spoke to him in low, soothing tones, telling him stories of the pack, of the future, of her hopes.
The mate bond, so wounded and twisted, began to mend. With his anger and betrayal silenced by unconsciousness, she could feel the raw, unfiltered connection between them again. She poured her love, her regret, and her fierce desire for him to live into that bond, a constant stream of silent prayer. On the morning of the 3rd day, he woke up. She was dozing in a chair by his bed when his hand moved, his fingers brushing against hers. Her eyes snapped open. His own golden eyes were open, clear and lucid, and fixed on her. "You're a terrible nurse," he rasped, his voice weak but his own. "You fell asleep on the job." A sob of pure relief escaped her. "You're awake," she breathed. "Thanks to you," he said, his gaze intense. He tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. She was there instantly, helping him prop himself up against the pillows. They stared at each other for a long moment, the silence thick with everything that had happened between them. The great hall, the cell, the rage, the battle, the blood. "The knife wound," he said, looking at his bandaged shoulder. "It feels clean. Healers said they'd never seen a silver wound cauterized like that. It was something I learned a long time ago, a lesson I wish I'd never had." "A lesson that saved my life?" he countered. He reached out with the good hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. His touch was hesitant, gentle, but it sent an electric jolt through her. "You were magnificent, Vivienne, and terrifying." "I was scared," she admitted. "You were a queen defending your territory," he corrected softly. He pulled her closer, his expression filled with a deep, aching regret. "I was a fool, blinded by my own pain, my own pride. I hurt you. I rejected you. I put you through a trial no one should have to endure. Can you ever forgive me?" "Can you forgive me?" she returned, her voice breaking. "For the lies, for the danger I brought to you. I never stopped loving you, Roman, not for a second, even when you hated me." "I never hated you," he whispered, the admission costing him a great deal. "I hated the lie. I hated that I loved you so much I couldn't see it. My wolf, it never gave up on you. It knew its mate, even when the man was being a stubborn ass." A watery laugh escaped her. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "We are a mess, you and I." "We are," he agreed. He tilted his head, closing the small distance between them. His lips met hers, and the kiss was not one of fiery passion, but of profound, healing relief. It tasted of salt from their tears, of forgiveness, of a love that had been to hell and back, and had somehow, impossibly, survived. It was a kiss that mended the broken pieces of their souls, the scars that now bound them together more tightly than ever before. Chapter 23. A New Dawn. When Roman was strong enough to walk, he called an assembly of the pack. He stood before them in the great hall, his arm in a sling, but his stance as strong and commanding as ever. Vivienne stood at his side, not behind him, but equal with him. He had insisted.
The pack was quiet, their eyes filled with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and uncertainty. They had accepted Vivienne as a hero, but her place among them was still undefined. "The threat of the collectors is not over," Roman began, his voice ringing with authority. "We have won a great battle, but their leader, Whitaker Thorne, is still out there. The intelligence Vivienne secured from their camp has given us the tools to fight him, but the war is not yet won." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his people. "We survived the first battle because we were united, and because we had a weapon that our enemy never anticipated. We had his own daughter fighting for us." He turned and looked at Vivienne, his eyes soft with an emotion that everyone in the hall could see was pure, unadulterated love. This woman faced a trial of fire and steel. She walked into the heart of the enemy's lair. She guided us, she protected us, and when I fell, she saved my life. She has bled for this pack. She has proven her loyalty beyond any shadow of a doubt. He took her hand, his good one, and held it up for the pack to see. There will be no more talk of her past. There will be no more talk of her bloodline. Her blood is now mixed with mine, with all of us. Her heart is the heart of the Blackwood Pack. She is not a prisoner. She is not a traitor. She is not a hero. He let the suspense build before he delivered his final resounding verdict. She is my mate. She is your Luna, and she has my heart, my soul, and my unwavering trust, now and for all my days. A stunned silence fell for a moment, then the hall erupted. It was not the angry roar of a mob, but the joyous, thunderous howl of a pack united, accepting their Luna finally and completely. Even Katja, standing at the back, offered a small, respectful nod. Vivienne looked at Roman, her eyes shining with tears of joy. He had not just forgiven her, he had championed her. He had taken her broken pieces and declared them beautiful and strong in front of the world. Later that evening, they stood on the balcony of their chambers, the same one where he had promised to protect her from her shadows. The night was peaceful, the territory safe for now. "It won't be easy," she said softly, leaning against his solid frame as he wrapped his good arm around her. "My father, he will not give up. He will see this as the ultimate betrayal. He will come for you." "Let him come," Roman rumbled, his voice a low, confident growl against her ear. "He will find us waiting. He will find a pack that is stronger and more united than ever. And he will find an alpha who has finally learned that his greatest strength is not in his fists or his claws, but in the woman standing beside him. He turned her to face him, his golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. No more lies, Vivienne. No more secrets. We face the future together, whatever it brings. Together, she agreed, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. They sealed their new vow not with words, but with a deep, passionate kiss under the stars. It was a kiss of new beginnings, of a love that not only survived the fire, but had been forged in it, emerging stronger, brighter, and unbreakable. The fury of the alpha had passed, leaving in its wake a love that was fierce enough to face any storm. Chapter 24, The Alpha's Vow. The war with Whitaker Thorne was long and arduous, a shadow that lingered for many months, but the Blackwood Pack was no longer fighting with fear. They fought with intelligence, with unity, and with the unique insight of a Luna who knew their enemy's mind better than he knew it himself. They were always one step ahead, dismantling his network, turning his own tactics against him, until the once feared pack killer was a cornered, broken man. The final confrontation did not happen on a battlefield, but in a quiet clearing where Roman and Vivienne faced him together. There, the sins of the father were finally laid to rest, and the cycle of hatred was broken. But that is a story for another time. Our story ends here, a year after the battle in the caves. On the night of the full moon, the bonfire in the central clearing burned bright, and the pack celebrated the anniversary of their victory and the peace they had fought so hard to win. Roman stood with Vivienne on the same rocky outcrop where he had first declared her his mate. He was no longer the furious, heartbroken alpha, and she was no longer the terrified girl hiding from her past. They were scarred, yes, but their scars told a story of survival, of forgiveness, and of a love that had been tested to its absolute limit and had emerged whole. He pulled her into his arms, his scent of pine and earth enveloping her. "You are quiet tonight, my love," he murmured, his voice the same loving rumble she had fallen for. She smiled, tilting her head back to look at him. His golden eyes held a universe of love just for her. "Just thinking," she said, echoing their conversation from so long ago. He chuckled, a deep, happy sound. "The fates had a plan for us, Vivienne, a difficult one, but a perfect one." He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was filled with the passion of a mate, the tenderness of a lover, and the deep, abiding trust of a partner. When they pulled away, he looked out at the celebrating pack, then back down at her, his expression serious and filled with a profound devotion. "I am the moon to my wolf, the heart to my man, and you are the steel in my spine. I love you more than the peace I fought to win." She rested her head against his chest, the strong, steady beat of his heart the only music she ever needed to hear. The fury was gone. The secrets were gone. All that was left was love. "I have seen the best of you and the worst of you, and I choose both." Like, share, and subscribe to support the author.